Welcome to the very special edition of the Tactical Crouch, episode 187 here. Obviously, I'm still here, Joe's still here. We finally got rid of Yeska, so we're going to have 3 people on the show this time with good takes. No more hot takes. No more of, Yeska's whatever that he's going to put out there that Joe eventually is going to make fun of on Twitter. We have instead, though, we got Unter, assistant coach of the Atlanta Reign. Max, how you doing? Eat shit, by the way. That's just how we say hello in Australia, but... Dude, you're like physically Atlanta. You got all the players behind you. You're in your little is that your practice room, I assume?
Yeah. This is the practice facility. I'm doing pretty well. Eat shit to you too, Kev.
Thank you.
Not everyone here today because it's a break day. I think we're sick, but yeah, actually physically in Atlanta now, which is pretty nice.
It's good, dude. It's taken a while. I mean, I remember you were like on your way to LA, and then you had to go to Hawaii. I think you were physically in Hawaii as well. And it's like you did a little bit of a loop around, then you go from Hawaii back to Atlanta.
I got my visa like on the day that we qualified for Hawaii. Like it got approved on the day, so there was a long leg of travel ahead of me. It was like I think I spent like 48 hours or something.
Jesus
Airports and planes on the way there because there's not a lot of flights from Australia to Hawaii at the moment.
No, I can't imagine there would be. Oh, dude. It's been
we go to the test later, and here we are.
Seems like you guys have had some good results though, man. Like you joined the team, and Atlanta's been on the up and up. This episode brought to you by Battle Crab, Refined Bean, Bronzebot Buhal, Chare, Chris R34444, Fabled Steven, Hunter Tane, Casher67, Lolshin, Rexane, Sir Girthalot, Wilma D, Yiska's Or Percentage Shower Gel, and Your Misery. You guys are basically table toppers for this particular stage in Countdown Cup as well. So, I mean, I think people are really curious. Like, what's the journey been like? We'll start from the top. I mean, like, so you link up with this team. You start coaching them. Like, I don't even remember when your first day on the team was officially, and how's the progression of the team gone since you've joined?
Well, I joined like before the season had even started. I still joined in the preseason. So I joined. We had a pretty rough stage one. I think I joined like 2 weeks before the season actually started, something like that.
Wow.
But just like finding my groove with the team, like getting comfortable with everyone and finding my place within the coaching staff, that sort of thing. But as the season's gone on, I feel like we've got like a stronger and stronger idea of like how we want to approach all of our matches, like the philosophy of what we want to do, what kind of comps we want to be playing, that sort of thing, how we're looking to improve. And I feel like just as we've gotten deeper and deeper into the season, because we've solidified that, like playing to our strengths, things have just gotten better and better.
When it comes to kind of integrating into a team, that's got to be kind of a, like you mentioned, it's got to be a weird process to kind of find your footing with the team. What was kind of different between, obviously this isn't your first foray within the Overwatch League. Could you kind of walk us and the audience through kind of figuring out exactly where you kind of fit? Is that something from the top down that kind of gets given to you? Like, okay, this is what we wanted you to do. We want you to look at like the micro and how teams, is that kind of how it's gone, or is it more kind of self-sufficient?
So, when I joined the team, initially I was hired like on a completely remote basis, so like no intention of me coming here, and they hired me as like an individual coach. So they didn't really have any intent of me doing like macro reviews, things like that. They just wanted me to like watch over a lot of player point of views and give them all individual feedback, because they didn't have anyone that was like dedicated to giving people individual feedback. Gotcha. So like when I joined, it was kind of just like getting to know everybody, building a rapport with everyone, because you need to deliver feedback differently to different people depending on how they take it, things like that. So when I joined, it was like a lot of watching player point of views, things like that, and just getting to know everyone so that I know how I actually want to like talk to everyone individually. But then like as things progressed, like I got more and more comfortable with the team. Like I just, that role became like a lot less rigid. Like very, very quickly that became rigid. Like I wanted to do more like team reviews, things like that as well. Because I think like just like shackling yourself to just like one role, like I'm only going to talk to the players about individual stuff. Like it's pretty limiting in that like, the game's big picture, so just giving people individual feedback isn't really enough. So like once I was comfortable with the team, like friends with everyone, friends with all the staff, it's like way easier to just do a review like that for the whole team and not just give people individual feedback.
I mean, I think this is a good chance to just, because of the fan, especially early on this year, because you mentioned that you guys kind of struggle in the main melee, and I think everyone would kind of agree with that. And there's a lot of fan narratives out there that sometimes, well, actually, generally, a lot of times, kind of inaccurate because they don't have the inside information. It's not really anyone's fault. It's just like no one really knows how things actually operate. And I think one of the prevailing like Atlanta Reign narratives that has been, especially early on in the season, that was talked about a lot. Was like, oh yeah, you know, Atlanta, they're that gatekeeper team again, and oh yeah, their coaching sucks, and they have no coaching. Like, oh, it's just Brad and legit again, Brad and legit RC again. They have no one there. People forget that you guys actually have a data analyst called Danny. I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I forget as well.
Yeah, he's a quiet guy, so.
I mean, we were talking off show, like, you know, Danny's actually done a decent amount of work for you guys. You were there since the preseason, which I don't think anyone publicly even knew, really. Like, that seems like, in everyone else's eyes, you showed up when the official announcement happened. I don't even know when the official announcement happened either. So yeah, it's like maybe even partway through the May Melee, because like the team was losing and everyone's like, oh yeah, blah blah. Here are the things. Yeah, the coaching sucks, blah blah blah. But I mean, behind the scenes, you were kind of there the whole time. So
yeah, no, I was. I think that's just like the red opinion kind of thing, where it's like, I got the job, and like if the team loses right after I get the job, nobody's going to blame me, because, you know, there's already like a narrative like against the staff on the team. But then as soon as the team starts to win, it's like, oh, it's all Unter. Like he changed the team, he revolutionized everything. It's just
but you take the credit, take the credit quick. It's your chance. Publicly take the credit now.
Yeah, no, I should just throw all the other coaches under the bus. It's all me. Definitely wasn't here the whole time.
Unter's coup. It's going to overthrow Brad.
But
Yeah,
also,
no,
like, I guess what you want to say is like it's a pretty good team effort, though, because like you guys, you know, you've been working as a full coaching staff the entire time, and like, I mean,
Exactly.
what has been the difference? What has been the difference between May and now, in your opinion? Obviously, like you need a bit of time to get to know your team members and get to know the staff and how that works. But like, how you guys go from a team in May Melee that struggled to now where you're like kind of one of the top teams, if not the top team?
Well, I mean, I think in May, like maybe we had a little bit of a different philosophy in terms of like how we wanted to, well, like what stuff we wanted to work on, you know, like we wanted to be really good at everything, and we wanted to like try and play to the meta as much as possible. But then after stage one, like that just, you know, just didn't work out, right? Like we lost to shit teams in stage one, like genuinely. And then like there were some balance changes that worked in our favor, so we were like, fuck it, let's just play into this as much as humanly possible all the time. So, you know, that's kind of what we've been doing ever since, in that, you know, now that they've buffed things that we're good at, and we've decided that we're just going to work on that and make it work, regardless of whether it works the first time we play it. I feel like things have gone a lot better. So, I mean, if you want a more like specific thing, in stage one, it was like we're kind of trying to force rush everywhere, and then like play dive in some other places. But you know, now like you don't see a whole lot of Atlanta Rain playing dive. You know, we play a little bit on the COF at this stage, and we made that work. But overall, you know, like we started leaning more into like bunkerish, Orisa comps, Ryan comps, things like that, and that's worked a lot better.
So when it comes to like not necessarily forcing things, I think I kind of understand what you mean. But when it comes to, like you said, on COF in particular, do you guys still feel like you need to run dive, or is it just like certain submap? Is it kind of a case by case basis? Is there like this prevailing narrative or idea behind the scenes when it comes to you know, analyzing the game at a pretty deep level, that like there are certain points where you just kind of have to run dive and wrecking ball?
Yeah. Well, like for COF, wrecking ball is just really good right now. You know, like comps and comps, things like that, and we play that. I mean, like we also play like Pharah comps, ball, and like those have all worked really well for us. Like this stage, I think we've played on all except for one map. We've played dive on like all of them, and we've won like every single COF map that we've played in the stage. Just about, like we're practically a COF team at this point. Where we have so much COF. Like all of our matches, you know, when they come down on map 5, I feel like we've won those. So we're doing really well with the dive there. But then there are other maps like Anubis where it's like bunkery comps are just incredibly difficult, because like just the map architecture, like it's really hard to not get kills traded if you're playing a bunker comp and you're all stacked so much. So there's some places where it's just too awkward to play a bunker comp. And then, you know, we found little subsets of dive where we feel it will be better, and we've made those work too.
So like this stage in particular, because you guys have been to Hawaii like twice now. You are, I would say, fairly likely to go this stage as well. You're 4-0 currently. You're the only team that's 4-0. Could be a few other teams that go 4-0 here, and we'll still have to see what happens in the knockouts, obviously. But I mean, look, I'll be honest. Like on this show, I was on Plat Chat as well. I said the same thing, and a bunch of the other personalities said very similar things. But like, there was a bit of doubt coming into the Countdown Cup where I think a lot of people were like, oh, Atlanta Rain, we look at the bans, we look at what Atlanta are good at. The bans have banned away quite a decent amount of stuff that you guys were good at. Haven't really seen much of Atlanta Rain in terms of playing the non-brawl type metas. You guys have been pretty heavily within brawl. So moving away from that, I think a lot of us coming in for this stage, especially based on your strength of schedule as well, which is really mega hard. something that we kind of touched on before we started the show as well. I think a lot of us were a little bit down on your chances of doing well this stage, but I mean, you've actually gone ahead and just straight 4-0'd, beaten everywhere. There was some close games in there. There was, we got two games that went to 3 and 2 map 5s here. So
yeah.
I mean, how did you guys overcome this stage in a situation where the hero bans probably screwed you guys a little bit, and you guys had to make some changes, I suppose?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the bans like really heavily shook up what we were doing for the previous 2 stages, because like we were trying to play like rush stuff, we were playing bunker comps that had like a lot of Sigma in them, things like that, and then obviously the bans ruined all of that because there's no Lucia, there's no Sigma anymore, so rush is out of the question. So like Sigma-ish bunker comps, but I think that even though like we were expecting a tough stage, right, like a lot of our stuff had been like banned out, and our opponents are going to be really hard. I mean, we came into it with the same philosophy that like if we figure out something that will work, that like works to our strengths, then we'll make it work, because like it's an extremely talented roster, like 100%. I think in stage 1 maybe we made some decisions in terms of like forcing things a little bit too hard, like not trying to find the right counters. But now that like all the meta's a little bit more fleshed out and we kind of know what's going on balance wise, I think that it's been like a lot easier to just figure out what it is that we want to play and what we want to work on for individual maps, like a few different archetypes to focus on.
Sure. When it comes to a little bit of specific, you mentioned that these hero bans kind of like shook up what you guys were doing. But as I was, before the show, I was doing a little bit more kind of deep dive review, specifically against Florida recently. That Symmetra pick on Havana, it felt kind of almost Lucio-esque, where you're kind of using it kind of as a mobility pick to try and like jump on the double snipers. Is that like, are you trying to find bridges to kind of return back to that that kind of comfortable style? Like, is that kind of the idea around the Symmetra as a whole?
Well, the Symmetra pick on Havana, it's like a lot of teams do like close holds, things like that with Rhine comps, and then like with the Sim, you can get like cheeky picks by TPing behind them, things like that. So like there's a lot of value. Like for the defense, you can get more fights by playing Sim, and then for attack, like you can break someone's hold really quickly just by TPing behind them and getting like cheeky kills there. I'm pretty sure we lost Havana versus Florida, and that's a pretty bad map for us. It performed pretty poorly, but I think like the rationale there isn't too bad. In that like first point, we just we like blitzed through the first point on our offense with the Sims, because we just got like we TP behind them, broke their hold straight away, TP'd onto their snipers, got them straight away. It's like there are things you can do with it. Like it opens up some opportunities. At the same time, like I don't think it's a mandatory pick or anything like that. It's more just like trying to do something a bit different, because nobody was playing Sim on attack for the map, and we made it work.
And that kind of returns to like what Avril was saying with like I'll take the blame and shoulder this for a second. Like I kind of perpetrated that same narrative. It's like I don't see where Atlanta can be kind of creative, but you guys have found so many different ways, whether that being peppering in your own kind of dive, allowing Pelican to get on the Pharah.
By picking Sim and losing Havana. That was
the point A was really, really interesting, because you guys kind of, I don't know if it was just, accidental genius, but like they kind of swapped double sniper into you, and then you immediately kind of shifted focus from like trying to just, increase the surface area of your composition. You just kind of instantly TP onto their snipers and kill them. Like that point A was actually really, really, really strong.
Yeah. I mean, it's there was potential in the comp, but execution was really.
That's fair.
We fucked up our snowball fight completely. We stayed on the Sim for ages when they had like Hanzo Kree or something. So we were kind of reducing our chances of wins by sticking on it for so long. But it is what it is.
That's fair.
I remember like it must have been like 2 episodes now ago when we were like previewing the Countdown Cup, and we're talking about like obviously this is when we're talking about like what teams we think probably have a good shot here based on the bans, based on where we think the meta is going. And at that point, it felt like, I mean, look at these bans. It's probably going to be more ball dive. It's got to be just more dive centric overall. If you feel like we kind of look at this and be like, oh, okay, all the rush teams will most likely struggle here. And I was thinking, I think there was a moment on the 2 weeks ago on the show where we were like, what about Orisa comps? Could Orisa comps work? And we were kind of like going back and forth, like, yeah, there's like maybe Orisa McCree or like some Torb and stuff in there. I'm like, yeah, I'll go and ask Unter. I'm going to drop a message, and I dropped you the message that same day. And I was like, yeah, what do you think about this comp? You're like, oh yeah, it could be decent, it might be map specific. But the more we've got into this meta, a couple of things that I didn't really anticipate as much, although I mean, like I saw it from a distance, but I didn't think it'd be like really prominent, was one, Pharah is being played a lot more than I thought. And that, maybe in NA, it's probably because there are still slower teams that run slower base compositions, and Pharah can kind of farm them. But even in APAC, there's a lot of fire being run, and versus very fast teams where I would have expected fire's not going to have great targets to shoot because you're not trying to just straight counter brawl now, are you? So and the secondary to that as well is the Orisa comps, where I kind of like we look at Orisa comps, you're like, oh, there's a possibility this could be a thing, and I could see some teams going towards it. And we Theorycraft on the show, we're like, Rain might be a team that want to go towards Orisa because you got Gator. The Gator Orisa has always been a thing, that's kind of signature. But now, I mean, it's not even just you guys. There's a lot of teams that are running this Orisa comp and different variations of it. Like Hanzo was actually a hero I didn't even think about, because to me, the Hanzo wasn't going to be a factor unless everyone was going to start running Orisa, in which case you might want to go Hanzo as, a bit of a soft counter or whatever. So I didn't even think about Hanzo. So it's just been a couple things that have been really moving in. And now Orisa is one of the more dominant compositions even across both regions, because before I would have just said, oh yeah, NA they're doing their Orisa cheese stuff, but APAC's got the real shit going on with the ball dive, right? But no, both regions are kind of running it, so I'm kind of surprised by that. I mean, you guys discovered this comp as well pretty quickly. Did you guys start running Orisa and scrims and be like, you know what, this is kind of okay?
Well, at the start of the stage, we were trying to do like a little bit more dive stuff than we wound up doing in the end. Like we thought, maybe our bunker stuff won't work as well because we were playing with things like Sigma. Sometimes we were playing Lucio. So places where we were previously playing bunker, we tried to run a little bit more dive. And on Koth, we settled on running a lot more dive in the end. But it was sort of just like experimenting, seeing where can we get away with a bunker, where do we have to play dive, that sort of thing. Just with the Pharah thing you were saying before, I think like one of the big reasons why people are playing so much Pharah, like especially on Koth, is that like Koth is just like dominated by Lucio all the time. Like people like to pick like high tempo comps on Koth, and Pharah's a hero where it's like you'll lose if you get out tempoed. And teams picking Lucio comps on Koth, it's the easiest way to out tempo you. But now Lucio's banned, so everyone can just pick Pharah because everyone is kind of obliged to play slower on Koth, thanks to the absence of Lucio. And then Pharah kind of like on big open maps, Pharah kind of shits on like free Zen comps and stuff like that because the backline just can't rotate anywhere. They just have to sit in the corner for the whole game.
It's like just something that you guys have never even done. Like, Joel, we'll get to you in a second, but it's just like,
yeah, you're good.
There's just stuff that I think you guys showed the stage that was kind of unexpected, and maybe that's kind of naive because, like, I mean, you guys got players that should be pretty flexible, but you guys just Rain built such an identity around this kind of rush, around the brawl, around the Rhine comps. And Lucio comps in general, that it was just like seeing anything else, was just you had to double take, like, hang on a second, like, what's going on here? There's Gator on ball, like that's a thing now. Little Pelly's on the fire, which I mean, you think about that, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. Pelican should be playing.
It's impressive though.
Fire. It is really impressive, and I think that's what kind of like everyone had to do a double take. Like you gotta rethink about this, like Atlanta, and not just kind of, not to call you guys a one-trick team, but like you guys focus hard on. And this dude, and by the way, that's not even, who even cares? I mean, Chengdu's a fucking one-trick team, and they're one of the top teams as well. So who cares about that? I mean, yeah, you guys are just probably naively on my part way more flexible than I think a lot of people thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe because what we were doing in like stages 2 and 3, maybe especially 3, like 3 we were really rigid with what we were playing. Maybe that cost us a little bit in Hawaii, but I mean, we have like an incredibly flexible roster. Like our players can play anything. It's just, we're trying to play what we're best at majority of the time. So, maybe in stage 3, we kind of got into the trap of playing a little bit too much of that without the flexibility. Like in Hawaii, we started losing to Pharah and stuff because we were playing comps that were just like, they just sucked into Pharah. But nobody in any scrim was picking Pharah because we were the only team playing our stuff. And nobody was practicing against it enough to actually counterpick. But then like one team picked Pharah and everyone's like, holy shit, we can just beat these guys by picking one hero. So, maybe we dropped the ball a little bit there. It didn't happen. But
well, is that necessarily like, and I'm not to completely jump in front of you guys, but like, is that necessarily your guys' fault, or is that just kind of the scrim bubble that you guys are situated in within NA? Like, is there a lot of the narrative, at least I think from Yiska's point of view, was that, there wasn't, or maybe there wasn't a strong Wrecking Ball team. Maybe there wasn't a strong Pharah team in NA to kind of practice against. Was that kind of the case?
Well, that's completely true, yeah. In that, like, the scrim bubbles are a huge thing. In that, like, because you don't scrim like 4 teams from NA in your given stage, and there's a couple of teams that you probably just never scrim due to quality of practice or whatever.
Sure.
The scrim circles are pretty small, so there's a couple of teams that will try to solve what you're doing. Some teams might not even care because they're like, oh, Rain are just doing their shit and we don't play them, so we don't care. And then that's kind of all you're left with, and the rest of it is just forward thinking. Like you need to think like, what are we weak to, and do we have an answer without ever having practiced against it? So I think it's you can blame the scrim bubble if you want, but I feel like that's kind of lazy. You know, like as coaches, we should probably be thinking about what are the weaknesses of our comps and thinking of answers to that. So like we definitely dropped the ball in Hawaii by like a defense Kings Row versus Fuel. You know, like that was a very winnable map, and we started on a symmetrical. So yeah, they picked Pharah and we lost the map. Surprising. Yeah.
I mean, I actually had you guys. I mean, when I remember going to Summer Showdown, we were kind of doing pick'ems and stuff like that. I had you guys potentially beating Chengdu. Like, if they lost to Fuel, and then you guys lose to Dragons, because the Dragons were just goated during that tournament. They were like really impossible to beat. But I had you guys beating Chengdu in the lower bracket if that matchup was going to happen. And for some reason, because I just felt like I probably underrated Chengdu a little bit, but I also felt like you guys were more flexible than the Fuel going into that tournament as well. Because I think Fuel were a little bit more even hesitant to change up what they were doing. I think they were still pretty locked into Lucio Moira kind of stuff at the time as well. And they obviously have zero capability hit scan. You guys always have Kai in the pocket, which you guys are playing a lot now at this particular stage. So, I mean, could things have gone differently in that kind of regard during Summer Showdown as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how we would have matched up versus Chengdu, honestly, because I mean, they were a really strong dive team as well. Maybe they didn't have like as much preparation or experience versus the stuff that we were doing. But the thing is that, like, again, Chengdu was a team that like they picked a hell of a lot of Pharah just like consistently. So that probably would have been a problem for us too. But the reality is, like, you know, we were playing to qualify for Hawaii, and then as soon as you're qualified, you're getting ready to leave. Everyone, like, they're going and getting their COVID tests, they're booking their flights. You're on your flights, you're traveling, and then our team got completely fucked for the most recent Hawaii in that like their flight got cancelled. So their first connecting flight out of Atlanta got cancelled, which meant that they missed their flight into Hawaii, which meant that they had to wait like an extra 2 days to get into Hawaii because all the flights were full. Ridiculous. So because of that, and they had to stay overnight in Dallas and all this shit.
Hang out in hotel or some shit, right?
Yeah. So there are no scrims in NA once you've qualified, because every single team goes on a break except for the team that you're going to verse in Hawaii. So you don't get to scrim anyone, and you have to get ready to travel. And then we spent like literally the whole time, start to finish, doing like travel related stuff. So by the time we were in Hawaii, and I mean, I was traveling from Australia to Hawaii, which is even worse than anything that they had to do. So there's not a lot of prep time for the APAC teams, so we probably would have got shit on by Chengdu's Pharah regardless, let's be real.
So you just show up, you play your game, you don't get to, there's no warm-up. I don't even know if you get to do a warm-up scrim if there's anyone that is even willing to play yet.
Oh well, we got there the day before, and Blizzard let us off the hook on shooting content because we were so late that there wasn't even time to do content anymore. But you get there, you settle in, maybe you play a couple of ranked games. We had a warm-up scrim in the morning, like some collegiate team helped us out.
I think Brad was saying, Brad publicly was like, he gave it like a thank you to American Tornado for always being there to like warm up teams and be a good scrim partner or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's like, oh yeah, like they just helped us out like every single time with a warm up. Like, you know, if we'd ask them to like play a comp or try to do something, they'd do it all the time. Like they were just a really good warm up partner because they were like a really high quality team. Like they were better than like heaps of AL scrims. Like they're genuinely better than like a lot of AL scrims.
I believe
and they would just do things that you'd ask. So they were really helpful. Yeah.
In a way, kind of like an academy team, right? It's definitely a hot topic, a little bit, right? A little bit. It's kind of dangerous to kind of talk about, but you know, obviously there is some value in having, you know, a practice partner that you can kind of ask to run things and have them, you know, run specific comps against you. Is that something that obviously, hopefully once we get into a healthier landscape, is that something you see teams maybe investing back into moving forward?
Feel free to skip anything, by the way, if it's weird.
Yeah.
If totally. Joe's asking some weird shit right now.
That's totally fine. I mean, I don't like see an immediate return to academy teams, honestly. I feel like the value is pretty limited. Like these contenders teams, like they're just hungry, you know, like they want to play, like they want to have good scrims. So they're just happy to do it. Like they don't need to be your academy team to do it. Like AT they're not like our personal slaves or anything. Like they do this for other they do this for other teams too. So I don't think that they're. And like with the state of what's going on with Tier 2 at the moment, I'm not entirely sure that next year there'll be any academy teams. Plus, all those guys are probably going to be in our next year anyway, except for the underage ones.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Cool. So go on.
I did want to ask specifically about Pharah. Kind of more broadly, looking at Countdown Cup, is you mentioned tempo and how, you know, obviously because Lucio's been removed, teams have been kind of not struggling to find their own tempo, but the control in general has been kind of a little, you know, wonky. One thing that I've particularly noticed, and I'm interested on your thoughts on this, was the aggressiveness of the positioning of like a lot of Pharah players. Like I've noticed that Naga's been very aggressive. Pelican in some areas kind of pushing forward, not necessarily playing your standard Pharah. Has that been like a cognizant change and something that you guys have had to like really kind of push people towards? Is like you guys have to actually engage. You can't just sit back and poke.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say so, because I think the reality is with like Overwatch League, if you're a team that just stands around and AFKs all the time, like you're just not going to win at the top level. Like Fuel is a team that is so like they're like spectacularly limited in that, like they can't play hit scan, like they have like some strange players where like their strengths are like they're a team that is going to succeed when they play fast, not when they play slow, all the time. So I think Fuel is like a really good example of like what you can do when you're just willing to go in and get things done and to play really fast all the time. So I think that like some Pharah players, they want to play like passively, they want to just like hover over the team, shooting down rockets forever. But then like the reality is, if you want to have like the most impactful play, 90% going to be like finding every opportunity to go, as aggressive as you can and get as much value as you can. So yeah, I think that it's not just a Pharah thing. It's like it's every hero in the game. Like the more you stand around AFK doing nothing, like the more likely you are to lose versus these teams, especially versus teams like Fuel. And you saw that like in the very first Hawaii, like Fuel versus Shanghai, where APAC was just playing really, really slow all the time. Like Shanghai were playing like Mercy Zen and stuff like that. Like comps that are just really, really slow. And then Fuel just like walked all over them by playing super high tempo stuff, where it's like on paper the comps don't look that great, but they just out tempo you. Like if you played it perfectly as Shanghai, maybe you could have won. But the reality is, Fuel is playing a really, really fast comp, and sometimes the easiest way to beat that is to just match their tempo, as opposed to, trying to play perfect Overwatch, where everyone hits every cooldown in the correct way to counter the abilities of the enemy.
I mean, you guys have definitely had some tempo shifts and stuff like that, because I think if we go to the first match and we start to really go through some of the games that happened in this particular stage in Countdown Cup so far, like you guys started off against Gladiators, and just for everyone's knowledge here as well, and for the people listening, it's like your schedule is Gladiators, into Houston, no break, and then next week into Florida, into Dallas, and you could argue, okay, I think people before Countdown Cup would have said maybe Florida could have been an easy team. That still ended up being a 5-mapper, and then obviously Dallas is always going to be Dallas, but even just starting from Gladiators, I think you look at that initial game, and with no one seeing any tape, no one seeing anything about what Gladiators are going to do and what you guys are going to do, on paper, that feels like it should be a comfortable Gladiators game, because they're like known to be a dive team, right? They're known to be a team that, there's the Kevs to Tracer team, you're going to have this team with, Mirror's going to go far or something like that, and you're going to have some real comfort in dive, because Glads are known to be a dive team, and you guys have not been known to be a dive team. So how do you navigate through this Gladiators game? And that is a 5-mapper, by the way. You guys won both the controls. You got both the Koths in there.
Well, I mean, I think Glads are a bit of a strange team in that regard. In that, it's like every single stage, it's like, holy shit, Glads are so crazy. Like they're the scrim gods. Everyone's talking about how great Glads are. But then, like stage after stage, they find a way to just like fall short and disappoint. Maybe this time it'll be different, right? But every time we go into a Glads game, it's like, wow, we've heard these guys are really, really good. And like you look at their roster on paper, and it's like, geez, these guys are a sick fucking dive team. Like they play that skewed guy on Brig whenever they're playing dive 2, and then they can go double flex support and stuff like that. Like I don't know, they're a team that has like so many things going right on paper, but then sometimes you just verse them in a match and they just throw and give you the win. So I appreciate that from the Glads, for sure.
Did you give Sam some shit?
Of course, every time.
At
this stage, it's gone.
Sam
it's
is
gone from
face.
like nice GGs to Sam is face, the Australian coach for Glads. But it's gone from like nice GGs tweets, nice GGs messages after the games to just like fuck you every time. Because I think he's getting sick of it too.
Oh god, they must be, because they're a team that I think they're like the opposite of you guys, because they were like hyped up, and look, I'm a fucking culprit. I hyped them up preseason. I'll be that guy. And then they've kind of like not had the same results, whereas you guys are a team. Atlanta's been a team that wasn't really hyped up, but then ended up being really big. I actually gave you guys a really high preseason rank, because I heard you guys were kind of like real good in scrims, and I remember people giving me shit like, wow, what do you have Atlanta? And you're like top 5, and everyone else had like Atlanta in like bottom 10 somewhere or something like that. But yeah, Glads have been an interesting team this season. I would have imagined they were going to be a little bit more competitive in this particular meta. Now, as far as standings goes, I mean, they're still 1-1. They can still potentially beat Florida, although to be honest, the Florida's probably a lot better than most people thought, so who even knows there. And then they got Houston as well, which I'm sure you'd love for Gladiators to beat Houston, but although that being said, looking at points wise, if I take a look at overall points for everybody, so you guys are on 12. You're Shock on 10, Houston on 10, Glad's on 9. So if they beat Houston, they're on 10 as well. So technically, Glad's aren't like right on your doorstep, and Shock and Outlaws are. So I assume you'd love to see Sam get a dub there versus Outlaws, right?
Yeah, I'd appreciate if they could just beat the Outlaws. Just this
one.
one.
Like, fuck you, Sam, but please also just beat the Outlaws. That would really help us out a lot. Speaking of, you guys beat the Outlaws, and this is a team that, like, okay, you look at day one, they beat Washington. This is before everyone realized that Washington were not going to be good this particular stage, at least publicly. I mean, maybe you guys scrimmed them and you knew beforehand. For everyone else, for all the plebs out there that are not privy to scrims, which is literally everyone, we all assumed that Washington was probably going to be decent because, again, another team on paper, they got Decay. It's the Decay tracer that, you know, kind of crap with the kind of stuff coming on through now. They should be a good dive team. Oh, like, Mag can play the ball, etc. Like, these are the storylines, right? And they come out, they lose to Houston, and right then you're like, because you're still assuming Washington's a good team, you're like, well, Houston must be pretty damn good because, you know, this is probably a good meta for Dante, especially. Seems like they got it going on. Django apparently is a ball player as well, and then you guys just stomped them 3-0. What's that about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like that series, honestly, like, I feel like we must have tilted them after map 1 or something. Like, they really fell over after the first map. First map felt really close. But you know, we edged it out, and then the next two were just zero resistance. So I don't know. That was I don't really have a whole lot to say with that one because, you know, we didn't scrim them beforehand, so we didn't know how good they were. I think in terms of them beating Washington, it's like, you know, maybe you look at that at face value and you're like, oh wow, they must be nuts. They beat Washington, but I don't know. Washington just have a knack for shitting the bed. Like every single stage, like without fail, they just shit the bed. So I mean, seeing them beat Washington wasn't like making me absolutely terrified of Houston. I'm gonna be real, because I feel like most everyone can beat Washington in a match. Oh, you know, they went 0-9 at the start of the stage. Yeah. But they do that every time. They do that every time. Like at the start of every stage, they just lose their ability to qualify. They'll go 0-6 or something at the beginning of a stage and lose their ability to qualify for the tournament, and then it's like, oh, now they look okay again. Now that the stakes are off. It's really weird.
But everyone is always like, because there's always the Decay copium, like, oh yeah, but Decay could always be that carry again, or Washington could always, you know, make a comeback. But you're right, like they go 0-6 and then they can't qualify anymore, which completely screws them. But I think there was just a copium there, like, well, I mean, it's a good meta for them. Surely it'll be decent. And you look at NA, I think there was a lot of, you know, dooming going over the NA side, like, oh no, this is going to be an APAC dominated meta. Heaps of these NA teams don't even play dive, and it's just going to look pretty rough here. And speaking of a team that was looking pretty rough around the edges, I mean, most people had pretty much written off Mayhem, not only from the stage, but like completely from the entire season overall. Because it was looking grim. I mean, you guys say you guys have a pretty rough strength of schedule here, which you do. I would say that you guys definitely have one of the hardest strength of schedules. Florida comparatively don't have as hard, but based on where they were in terms of skill level or perceived skill level, it seemed like, you know, there were plenty of people out there that were looking at Mayhem and being like, well, this is probably going to be an 0-4. They're not going to qualify. They're not going to escape the bottom 3, and it might be done. And now it's looking like they might be able to skip over Boston. So that'd be a little bit sad for little Punky and Chex. But you guys faced up Florida, and that was a really, really tight game. And was that Florida's first game? It was Florida's first game this stage. Seeing OG back, and that ended up being a bit more of a struggling game. Whereas I think most people, especially after seeing you guys dominate Houston, would have been like, oh yeah, this will be Atlanta 3-0.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Florida is that, like, they actually do have like a really talented roster, but they've just had some moments where it's like, I don't know, they just kind of throw sometimes. I don't think that they're like an absolute top tier team, like realistically, but I mean, like they genuinely like had us on the ropes on that series. You know? Like I think us losing Havana meant that we had like a really high chance of losing that series. Their Hanamura start was like really good. Like they had a really good execute on the first point that just like blew our hold open. Like it was clear that they'd like, you know, they'd played versus the sort of stuff that we were doing in our defense, and they had like a really, really good execute plan for it for Hanamura. So, you know, I'll give them the Hanamura win. But Havana, like that was an expected win for us. You know, it's like we're taking a Ryan Mirror versus Florida. So I would have thought that like that map, like that should be the one that we're like definitely pegged to win. And then like even on the final COF, like it was really, really close. But Yaki just made like a critical error that just won us the series, so I appreciate that from him. He hard carried his team for like the entire map, but then he just decided he was going to give us a win too. So that was safe. Like I appreciate that from him.
Yeah, he's a specific person that kind of is interesting because he, in this match in particular, I felt like kind of referencing the Hanamura A push that they did. really kind of getting in there super aggressive, and even going into the Koth. Really impactful on the Pharah, and obviously on the Tracer. Definitely a pick that he's known for. How do you as a coach kind of approach players like this? I mentally kind of look at it like a chessboard, right? Like where you can kind of my views kind of fixated on like where Hawk is going and like where he is a resource, kind of like managing these threats. How did you kind of try to maybe adapt, or like what were some of the things that you said to the guys going into the last Koth game? Like, was there a specific like mark on his Pharah? Was there something that you wanted to kind of shift in terms of resources to try and shut him down?
Well, in terms of mid-match adjustments, sometimes it can be a little bit like that. But I think that often like your role within like a comp matchup, if we're versus Pharah, naturally Hawk's job is going to be to like try and shut down that Pharah as much as possible. Keep her in check, like eat as many of the rockets that are going towards the back line, things like that. If Yaki's on Tracer, he's going to be trying to eat as many pulse bombs as possible. So I think that I think it's important not to like get in our own players' heads and be like, you've got to be so scared of Yaki. Like,
sure.
I don't want to go into a match versus Mayhem and like have our players scared of Yaki, because if you're scared of your opponent, then already you're going to lose to him. Same thing when you're versus Washington. It's like if we're just telling them like Decay is just going to shit on all of you, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy if people are scared of the player. Like you need to have no respect for your opponent when you verse them. So I think that strategically, like versus the comps they were playing, like everyone knew their role. They already knew what they were supposed to be doing, like what heroes are supposed to be marking, who they're supposed to be fighting, where they're supposed to be rotating, things like that. And then from that, it's less about like, oh, you've got to be so scared of Yaki this map. It's more like, we versed this in scrims. You already know what to do because we'd already been there. We'd already practiced against it, and yeah.
You guys like the master of disrespecting. I mean, in a good way. I think it's funny to me. So that works out.
Everyone is so fucking boring, so it's not hard. Disrespect in this league.
Oh, I mean, dude, that London game, and we can get into that a little bit. I mean, we still got one match to talk through about how you guys went, but in terms of just on that topic line, that specific London game with the BM got you guys into a little bit of hot fire, but at the same time, I think the other hand on the other side of the coin, it was like also one of the best moments of the league in terms of
it's topical. You get a little bit of
yeah. I mean, if a couple of people are going to boycott the team because we didn't cap the point for 3 seconds, and it's not coming home. I mean, that's it's up to the fans. I think most people enjoy it. It's just a vocal minority who get
I'm sure your fans enjoy it
for no reason.
I think you guys.
I'm sure most of our fans enjoy it.
You guys got this. You guys got the bad boy vibe about your team, which is kind of like you guys are the only team that I think really would actually play into. I don't even want to use the word villain, but it's like you have this more like kind of don't give a fuck vibe, which is kind of cool. That's just from my POV anyway.
I think it's accurate, honestly. Like a lot of teams, they want to be like they want to be thought of as like the wholesome people. They're like working really hard and humble all the time. And
brand friendly.
So you say sorry, sorry after every match loss. You like get the tweet out. I apologize.
Sorry, GGs will be better next time. That sort of thing every single time. Like no, fuck that. Like have some fun with it.
I'm sure.
You guys talked about Ryan a little bit here because I'm actually curious about Ryan's place in the. I'm gonna be honest with you. When I was looking at this meta, Ryan is a hero that I was like, it's dead. No one's gonna pick Ryan. Zero reason to play Ryan. Why would you play Ryan without a Lucio?
I was probably gonna leave the game unless like for some reason.
Seems like it'd be a complete waste of time. But you guys had a Ryan matchup versus Florida. Like, what prompts anyone to even want to run a Ryan?
Well, Havana's a map that is just Havana kind of sucks for a dive overall. So people are going to pick Orisa or Ryan. And then like I think Orisa comps on Havana, like maybe they're just a little bit overrated, honestly, because Havana, like first point defense, it's like really good to spawn camp with Ryan because you can get 3 fights that way. So you get more fights out, you bleed ults out of the enemy. It's a recipe for a full hold if you don't fuck it up like we did, which tragic. So like that's a good reason to play Ryan on Havana because you can get 3 fights out of it and you can spawn camp really easily, which you just can't do with Orisa. And then I think broadly, like Ryan still has a place in a lot of these like bunker comps trying to counter dive because like there's value in having the damage from your Ryan and having a mobile shield. Orisa, like you get a lot of value from pulls, like that's really good. But the shield, you set it down and then it's gone for a while. You can't move it anymore. So I think having the mobility of Ryan, like helping you rotate and things like that, is really valuable. And then sometimes Beta can just make some magic happen with a miracle pin or a good fire strike, things like that.
So would you say that in a weird way, it's kind of not an answer to it, feels a little too aggressive, but the reason why Ryan's in the meta is because Orisa's definitely kind of found her own like niche area, that kind of archetype, not centered around Orisa, but because she's played a lot more, Ryan can kind of squeak in, and not necessarily as a counter, but giving you more tempo?
I don't think it's so much about the Orisa. I think it is more about like what the like tanks the enemy team are playing in terms of like Ball or Winston, things like that. So yeah, I do feel like it's more about like what kind of comp you're trying to counter from the enemy. Because if they're playing like something that's really, really spam centric, like it's just hard to play Orisa without a second shield because the shield breaks really, really quickly, things like that. So if the enemy's defending on like a really, really pokey comp, like you might not want to play Orisa into that.
What's not the watch, right? I want for the fucking.
Let's talk about the fourth and last match you guys played just recently versus Dallas. This is the big one. This is the one where I think up until this, correct me if I'm wrong, but in official matches,
Like
this
a
is
leak
your
one, like a leak extra version.
first win versus Dallas so far this season. I think you played them 4 times.
And yeah, I think that was our 4th match.
Yeah, so you've gone. I mean, there have been some close matches. I mean, I don't even know if you'd consider Dallas like a rival at this stage. I think when I look at you guys versus Dallas, that always feels like a really high stakes match. Always feels like a bit of a rivalry match from my
no,
POV.
they're definitely a rival at this point. Like they kept beating us, so yeah, definitely a rival. You know, they're like competitors for top dogs. Like they keep going to Hawaii. They keep getting further into Hawaii than we do. They beat us every time. So yeah, definitely a rival.
Dude, I mean, even remember, I think it might have been last year when Atlanta beat Paris, something like that, and Gator's like, yo, I finally beat Element, Mystic, and Sparkle, something. Because this goes back as far as Gauntlet, like real talking. I mean,
Gator and Hawk have a fucking abysmal record.
Sparkle's not great. Yeah, it's been going on for like a couple of years, man. Because I remember that Gauntlet and Gator walked past, about an hour ago before we started recording, even, and and I just remember. Yeah, that I don't know if there's like an internal rivalry there, but that's just been going on for a while as well. But finally, you guys got one over them. I got to imagine Dallas must be a weird team to go up against and prep against, because you even teased a little bit that this is a team that has a strange ability to not be flexible. I mean, obviously they just don't have a hit scan player to do that. Well, maybe that gets fixed now, but Dallas is just like a very different team, I think, in your region to go up against, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this victory against Dallas, like this is the stage where it's like lowest stakes for them, right? Like they'd already, by the time we played our match, they'd already hard locked in seed 1. Even if a team was to win every single match in the stage and win every single game in Hawaii, they still couldn't catch up to Fuel. So I think that like these were bands that didn't favor Fuel at all, and they were completely hard locked on seed 1. So we finally beat the Fuel, but we actually have to finally beat the Fuel again when there are some stakes on the line for them. Because I feel like this stage didn't really matter to them. I feel like they don't want to go to Hawaii, if anything. So it's nice to beat those guys, but at the same time, like I want to beat them when it actually matters for them.
Now, AVRL kind of danced around it a little bit with the hit scan comment, but any thoughts, any opinions on the big boss arriving finally in Texas?
Okay. I don't know. Pine is a weird pickup, honestly. Possibly the least expected pickup of all time, at least, because I thought they were going to go for like a new up and coming hit scan player. Like those guys, like they know good hit scan players out of Korean contenders. Like they're friends with them. So, and Dallas doesn't have any shortage of money, so it's not like it would have been an issue for them to sign an up and coming hit scan player. But I think that like Pine, he had a good run a couple of years ago, but then he kind of like faded out and kind of stopped being a pro. So I think it's a very unusual pickup for them, honestly, just because it's like he's not super up to date with like heroes like Ash, stuff like that. He hasn't been a pro for a long time, so I think a lot of the perception is that he's like past his prime, like well and truly. So it was a weird pickup, but there's like huge PR around him. He's a really famous player, and everyone's happy to see Pine. So even if they give him a map, and even if they lose it, like I think people will still be happy just because it's Pine.
So what? Kai's ready to shit on him? Is that where we're going in that direction?
I will fuck him up, like no doubt.
Kai's getting ready, I'm sure. Okay, so I guess there's not too much to dive into that matchup. I mean, this is a team that is now, I guess, unlikely to make it into the Countdown Cup. I don't think it's impossible. I think a 2-2 record in NA is a lot more forgiving than a 2-2 record in APAC, for what it's worth. So the chances are still there, but I mean, Max, you're saying they're probably not that keen to go anyway. But that's the complete opposite for you guys, because you came into this one really needing points. You have now got 4 extra points out of this one. You needed to have like pretty much a perfect stage. You have to go to Hawaii, I assume. You got to get that extra point, because you have on your heels, you got like a Houston on your heels and a Shock on their heels. Shock, who I would say are more than guaranteed to go 4-0, unless for some reason Toronto win. Vancouver are not going to beat the Shock. And then Houston, where, look, old mate Sam might be able to take down Houston from Gladiators POV. Florida seems like a fairly decent team this stage, all things considered, so maybe Houston go down there as well. I mean, you guys got to go there, and Shock is probably your closest target in terms of competition.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that like, you know, for us this stage, like locking top 3 is the priority. Like going to Hawaii every single time takes like a really big toll because like on top of all the travel and stuff like that, Hawaii happens when every other team gets a break. So we finish Hawaii, we come home after all of the stress and travel of Hawaii, and immediately we have to start scrimming again because the new stage is upon us. So we haven't had like a proper break, like a break of more than 2 days since stage 1, ended because we didn't make it to Hawaii that time. And we need to go to Hawaii again because we need to either get points to like stay ahead of Shock, Outlaws, and Glads, but we need to gatekeep teams like Outlaws and Glads from getting bonus points in Hawaii. So either way, like there's no break in sight for us really because we need to go to Hawaii again. Unless there are like some miracle, like say Defiant and Justice or something make it in. Actually, it can't be Justice. Justice is out of contention completely.
Yeah.
But say Defiant and Shock make it to Hawaii, then that wouldn't be the end of the world for us, assuming Houston don't go 2-0 next week, because that would lock us into top 3 guaranteed. Defiant can't catch up with us in points, and Outlaws and Glads will be permanently behind us. But we need to stay ahead of Outlaws permanently, and we can't have Glads going to Hawaii and winning 3 bonus points and getting ahead of us too, because that would knock us out of top 3.
You need one of those teams to be out. Yeah, you need either Shock or Houston to pretty much be out, and Glads obviously to be out of there, but they're still a point behind.
Yeah, I think the thing with Shock is that like because Shock are already like tied up with us, it's quite unlikely that it's just like Shock would have to really heavily shit the bed to wind up below us at this stage because they have like 2 pretty winnable matches this week, and then they'll be ahead of us. So yeah, in my mind, it's more about like what's going to happen to Outlaws and Glads, honestly, to determine whether we make top 3. So we need to go to Hawaii.
So like your vision's kind of already set to Hawaii when it comes to much in the same way that it did, last stage. How far ahead are you guys looking as a coaching staff, looking at some of the things that APAC's doing? Obviously, Zarya seems to be a little bit more of a niche pick that still sees a little bit of playtime out there. Is that something you guys are already kind of looking at? Do you have any thoughts on that? Any opinions?
No strong opinions, really. Like we don't look all that much to APAC to try and like figure out what we want to play, because I mean we were skimming through some APAC boards the other day, maybe a week ago, and we're thinking like, oh, look at that, Soul's copying us. Soul's doing the same thing that we were doing. So it's like, oh cool, someone's copying us, but like we haven't, because APAC is like a predominantly like dive-centric region, I'd say for the most part. They mostly just wind up playing those comps. That's not really what we're trying to do for the most part. We're trying to make our stuff work, which has worked so far. Instead of 4 stage. But yeah.
Makes sense.
So how do you see the rest of this going now? Because we have you obviously still have to play the knockout, which I think at this stage you'll be guaranteed the first or second seed going to knockouts. So you need to win 1 match to get into the actual to get to Hawaii itself, and then you'd have to say, I mean, if we had to take a guess, Shock is probably the most likely other team just based on where they are. I don't know if you consider them to be a strong competitor in this particular stage, to be the other team. Well, let's assume you go to Hawaii. Let's assume whoever you go up against, you will go to Hawaii. Shock's probably on the other side of the bracket. Are they the team that probably goes to Hawaii with you guys, or what?
Look, it's really hard for me to say, honestly, just because the thing is that like our scrim bucks don't mean everything. Like we play our stuff and then other teams play other things. So it's really hard to know how teams match up into different things. Like we know how Shock matches up into what we play, but we don't know how Shock matches up into, say, what Toronto play. This is an example. So it's really hard to know like who else, like assuming we're going to Hawaii, it's really hard to know who's going to go with us, because I don't really know how a lot of our like opposing teams actually match up.
So it'll be you guys, and then most likely, let's just rattle off a bunch of names here.
Shock Glads.
Shock Glads. Okay, you're hoping Houston don't go there, but there's a non-zero chance. Like who knows? I had some mad Paris hype behind me going to this stage as well. Maybe I'm stupid, but like I thought Paris were going to do really well. They canceled. They still got 2 games left that are fairly winnable, and they got Toronto and London. I'm sure there's a fair chance in there. Who knows what side of the bracket they're on? Yeah, it's you guys, the teams that we listed off, and you go over to the APAC side of things in terms of who's going to Hawaii, because we're about to get into the topic of like, well, what is Hawaii going to kind of look like? And before we started recording the show, we had a brief chat where you saying like this is probably going to be the most winnable Hawaii tournament, the winnable stage of all of them so far. It's looking like, in my opinion, Chengdu is going to be a lock. They're the next best team after Shanghai anyway. Shanghai are out. They don't want to go. We get it. New York are waiting for a tiebreaker. I think it's unlikely they go. It's going to be one of Fusion or Seoul. I don't know which yet, but it'll be Chengdu and then either Seoul or Fusion. So being that, I think you guys are a lock. We'll just assume you guys are a lock. We'll assume Chengdu's a lock, and then we'll assume Soul Fusion, Shock, Glad's one of those. 2 out of those 4 teams will be there. Like, you know, it's just gonna be the Atlanta win. I mean, I think the expectation is that you guys you're looking for a win in Hawaii, obviously. But like, how do you see Hawaii panning out with that kind of?
It's so fucking loud in here. Oh my god.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think definitely like this is the most winnable Hawaii of all. You know, especially like because Shanghai specifically not being there is like a huge deal. Just because Shanghai is just absolutely insane. Like really, 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 really flexible. You know, like Shanghai, they probably suck at like Ryan Rush, something like that. But they just play a bunch of other stuff everywhere else. Like Shanghai is a really, really strong team. So them not being there is just like really, really important to how free Hawaii looks this time around. Teams like Fusion have looked like pretty good this stage over in APAC. All the NA teams, it's just like a permanent mixture, so I don't really know. But yeah, I'd say like the absence of Shanghai and then the absence of like a high effort fuel just naturally makes this Hawaii the most winnable, you know, because the permanent winners are both not going.
I mean, do you think you're a favorite? I think you should. Maybe that's like a bit of a loaded question. I'm only asking that because like when I looked across what other people are saying and what the general sentiment out there is, I think most people would look at Atlanta now as like a top favorite team, when especially if Dallas is not going, and Dallas has always been the default favorite, and if they're not there, then it kind of goes to Atlanta automatically almost. I mean, do you see that?
I'm not gonna sit here in front of you and tell you that we're not gonna win. Right?
Exactly.
Like,
Well, yeah, that's probably a stupid thing to
us.
talk about, but it's just like, I mean, it's more like, where's your confidence level at? I mean,
Of the,
High?
I mean, highest of the lot, right? Because
highest a lot, yeah.
Shanghai 3-0'd us twice when we went there, and Shanghai aren't going. So got to be happy with that, right?
Were you guys like when you threw out that tweet ages ago, which was the June Joust tournament? You threw out the tweet, and then like how confident were you behind that tweet? Like because Shanghai initially lost and they did look pretty bad. So in your mind, was it like, oh yeah, Shanghai now they're done here, they're kind of shit?
To be honest, I tweeted that after we played Nixel, and they were just complete dog shit. I wasn't really thinking all too much about Shanghai when I tweeted it, but you know, it was a pretty poorly phrased one, given that, you know, Shanghai stuck it in us a day later, pretty aggressively. But yeah, I mean, Nixel sucked at the tournament, I'll give him that. But yeah, Shanghai not so much.
Just a different team, man. They're built diff.
Truly built diff. Oh man.
Joe?
I mean, yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. They're not an easy team to kind of wrap their head around. But with regards to Atlanta moving into, you know, the Countdown Cup, like the big question I think on everybody's lips is, you know, how is APAC really going to fare with such a strong bunker team and not somebody that can is completely just focused on their bunker play, right? Atlanta has been very successful running a lot of ball, running around, doing one thing that kind of caught me off guard was Temple B and how much you guys were kind of pressing the attack, really forcing the tempo. It kind of feels like Atlanta has the entire breadth of the meta under their belt. It's not just one thing. Obviously, you can pull the Orisa and it looks really, really strong, but there's no gap. It's a full gambit of strategy that you guys are wielding, and I don't know that APAC has that same capability. I think they're going to be the ones in the back foot adapting to you guys.
I'd say that too. You know, that's probably like somewhat accurate. I think that like this stage of them all, like it's one where we've actually gotten to show like our full flexibility. Like we do a lot of different stuff on Koth compared to what we do on hybrids and payload and PCP, things like that. So I think that because like now we have like basically a full variety of comps, like we play a mixture of dive, bunker, Ryan, Orisa. Like we're basically playing everything. At that stage, like we're no longer really easily counterpicked, you know? The coaches don't have to just sit in the room and think, what's the one hero we need to pick to beat the comp that they're playing on every single map all of the time. So because we have like a lot more variety behind us, I think that like the enemy, like especially our APAC opponents who have never scrimmed us, will have to adapt a lot more.
Yeah. But it depends on matchups here as well, because, you know, I think for one part, the meta is a lot more open in this particular stage than I thought. Totally. But beyond that as well, I don't know if there is such a thing as like a dominant composition in this meta. Like, yeah, like if you play this into this, I mean, if what I'm getting to is like if APAC default to dive, and we'll use Chengdu as a clear example here because I think they'll more than likely be the #1 seed out of APAC, and they're a team that is pretty much one-tricking. They have been for a while, and they've been very successful at one-tricking. And I'm not saying that in a negative way because Dallas are also one-trick and they've been very successful. And you guys have one-tricked in the past as well in previous tournaments, so it's nothing wrong with that in any regards. But Chengdu most likely will run as much fire as they can. They'll run a lot of ball, and very limited Orisa. They have like a very tiny amount of Orisa that's going to be in there. But is there going to be, like, I don't know if there is a dominant meta. I don't know if it's going to be in terms of matchups. You guys are going to be more flexible, but is ball still like the comp for the most part? I think the answer here that you might say is it's a little bit map dependent, maybe.
Yeah, I mean it definitely is map dependent. On Koth, ball is just insanely good. Like ball's really good on Koth, but then outside of Koth, it's a lot more. The same thing goes for Pharah, where it's like Pharah's been really good on Koth, or at least for a lot of the Koth points. But then when it comes to like 2CP, payload, stuff like that, like it really heavily depends on the map, Like teams playing Pharah on Blizzard World are probably going to struggle with it a lot more than a team playing Pharah on, like Rialto, like a good Pharah map. So it really just depends on the map at that stage. So I think that then when you come down to the tournament, it might come down to like teams are winning their map pick because they get to play to their strength on their map pick, and then they get to lose to their weakness on their not map pick.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, map picks are going to be a huge deal there. That's going to be the one big factor. And I think the order you pick maps as well, who ends up losing where, and then what becomes open in terms of the picks itself. And then
the seeding actually really matters too. Because,
true.
Having a first
you want
pick
to be
is
the
really
high
important.
seed. Yeah, because you could be first seed here, right? So, actually, how does that work? Yeah, you. Am I stupid? There's an NA1, NA2. Yeah, of course. So yeah, I mean, your first seed would definitely matter quite a lot. But then you also have like Seoul, Philly, and you said it's like Seoul kind of running a similar thing. I guess that's actually maybe even good for you guys because you're like kind of prepped versus teams that run similar stuff to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were to say if Seoul wouldn't make it, I mean, I think that'd be a pretty good thing for us because like if we were to wind up in a bunch of Orisa mirrors versus Seoul, like just back us 100% every day of the week. So I mean, that'd be nice. You can quote me when we lose to Seoul in Hawaii.
I'm sure there'll be a Seoul fan out there like, I got you. They got it, right?
There it is.
There's been like this entire narrative around the scene where it's saying that APAC teams are going to be the far superior ball teams, and NA are going to be far weaker on the ball. I mean, just blanket, that's kind of true? Would you say, or is that kind of load of shit?
I think that would have been true, like going out of stages 2 and 3, because teams just weren't playing it in NA. Like how Moon was saying, like, it's the Shanghai head coach was saying that, like, that maybe there aren't ball teams in NA, and that was true because teams weren't playing ball in stages 2 and 3, or like they were barely playing it, whereas APAC was just being dominated by it. So I think that at that time, APAC was like really, really far ahead of NA in terms of like the quality of their ball comps and like the strength of it because they really understood it. They've been practicing it for a long time. But I think that NA is like significantly caught up in that regard. Lots of people are playing it now, and I don't think that APAC would have some crazy edge. Like maybe they've been playing it all year, so they still have a stronger understanding of it. They're a little bit more fleshed out, but at the same time, it's not like a world's difference, which it was before.
Yeah, so you can roll up into a Koth versus like a Chengdu.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not
because we've been playing ball on Koth
Yeah.
whole stage, so you'd hope so at this stage that we could make it work.
You got the Pharah in there as well. You actually are running Kai a lot more than I thought. For some reason, I thought that like if you were going to lean towards, to be fair, I didn't really know exactly what you guys want to run. But if you were going to run, because last stage you ran, I think Edison primarily on Tracer, and I was thinking that if you were going to go into more dive based on Tracer, Edison was going to be coming in. Kai might not see that much play time. I was thinking in my head, like, I don't know if there's that many good like Kree comps, or I don't know if what else got gameplay. I also probably underestimated Kai's hero pool. I think a lot of people did, because Kai's hero pool is predominant in being the hard hit scans, and people don't think of Tracer when they think of Kai. People don't think of I'm even struggling now to think of some of the other picks, but I know he's playing like Soldier this stage, for example. I think Soldier was a bit of a sleeper pick, so I just think in my mind I wasn't really expecting that much Kai, but you guys have been running Kai the entire time.
Yeah, we have. I mean, I think the thing is that, like, I don't want to get too deep into the strategy, like,
sure,
and whatnot. But, I think that Kai's Tracer was definitely like pretty heavily slept on in terms of people thinking that, like, he just can't play it. But he definitely could. Like we played Tracer versus Glides on Cots, and we won both Cots versus Kevster on Tracer. So it's not like Kai can't hold his own on Tracer and can't make it work. And then Kai has like a really, really wide hit scan hero pool. Like he can play everything to like an extremely high level. So I think that there's like a lot of value in having him in the server for like basically just having every swap at your fingertips. And like the final missing piece was like, can we put Kai on Tracer and make it work? And we started to do that, and it was working. So it's like good stage for Kai. And then like in the previous stage, like Edison was playing a lot of Reaper and Sim as well.
Yeah,
we're playing Reaper and Sim, and Eddie's like really strong on both of those. Whereas now, because we're not really playing those, now it leans a little bit more into Kai. Like there's more hit scan being played.
Makes sense.
You guys have obviously flexed Pelican around a lot as well. I think for most of the stages, because you guys have been, again, like more focused on singular comps, that you're gonna hard run this one type of composition, which means Pelican's probably just gonna play this one hero. He's shown a lot more looks this particular stage than maybe expected. Because even when I remember him on O2 Blast, he was kind of overshadowed a little bit by Proper, who's still underage and still waiting to be picked up. I'm sure that guy's gonna be a monster next year.
Absolutely.
But he had to kind of. I mean, you guys have played O2 Blast in the past with the Proper Pelican duo, and Pelly back then, his hero pool I think was a little bit more forced to be limited because he had to pick around Proper's heroes. It seemed like if I was going to draw a comparison, it kind of seemed like Sparkle Doha's kind of mixed a little bit when I talk about Pelican Proper, because when I look at it, and this is just my interpretation, but it does seem like they give preference to like what is Sparkle's best hero in this particular composition. Give that hero to Sparkle, and then Doha picks around it. And that's how I looked at Pelican's position on O2 Blast in the same way. Like, what is Proper's best hero? And then Pelican picks around it. So he ended up being kind of, I wouldn't say shafted, but he was that player that had to, like, you know, take a bit more of a backseat because Proper was the dude. And now, like, I don't know how you guys work Pelican into your team, but he's been, like, probably one of the most talked about players, like, the #1 player that everyone's got on their lips for Rookie of the Year, potentially MVP, all of that kind of stuff. So, you know, how you guys work with them.
Pelican is a flex god, right? Like he can actually play everything. Genuinely, he can play absolutely everything. Like every hero, he's an incredibly flexible player, and it's not just like a jack of all trades, master of none. You know, like he's actually like, you know, one of the best players in the world on multiple heroes, as well as being able to play them all. Like he's just an incredibly good player. So I think that like Pelican fits into any comp that we want to play. It does not matter what we want to play. Pelican will never be the limiting factor in terms of hero pool because he can play it all. So I think that, you know, I mean, I would shit in my hands and clap if that kid doesn't win Rookie of the Year. Genuinely, like it is insane. Like he's played it all for us, and every single hero we've put him in, he's had carry performances. Like every single hero. Like he's a really, really impressive player. People were shitting on him in stage 1 because he had like a couple of deaths on Tracer on like a map 5 once. You know, like he had a couple of sus deaths on Tracer at the start of the year in his first Overwatch League match ever. And it's like, wow, this guy. You know, people saying that he sucks and that they never want to see him on Tracer again. Now he's like winning player of the match every time he picks Tracer, and just like dominating Sparkle in our match most recently. So I think that Pelican just like an insanely flexible player, like strategically, like you know, we're picking a comp, but then we're not picking, like, you know, maybe we're trying to pick the Pelican's strengths, but at the end of the day, Pelican can play everything, so he will fill any gap.
Yeah, I mean, to your, you know, to your credit, to your Pelicans' credit, to this team being such not an evolution, but a team that really kind of feels like it's finally coming into their own with Countdown Cup. Defending Pelican's Tracer for a moment, looking at how much impact he had specifically on the Havana, I know a little bit of a sore spot, but the second that he swaps to Tracer off of Sim and just immediately dumpsters 2 people, breaks open that B point, and then it's just an easy cap, right? Like I think Sideshow mentioned it on the broadcast, right? Like it may have been a little bit slow, but you get there and then you look at how, you know, overwhelming he can become for this backline, right? He emits so much pressure that it's genuinely impressive. I didn't know that he had such a Pharah, and now he comes out and he's battling some of the best Pharahs in the West. He has the Tracer, he has all these picks, some of which maybe we haven't even seen. Like it's impressive. He's really climbing up the Rookie of the Year ranks for sure. 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a single rookie.
Yeah,
like,
he's getting
in the same league as him, because like I think the other like big person that might have been in contention was like Piggy, right? Because Piggy had like some really awesome performance Sigma throughout the year. You know, like statistically, he's the best Sigma in the league. He's like a really strong performer on that hero. But other than that, like when has Piggy had a good performance off Sigma so far? Like it's just I don't know. Pelican has unmatched flexibility, and in every stage he has these carry performances. Piggy, you know, he's done it. He's done it when he can pick Sigma, but not so much elsewhere.
Yep. The only other person that I feel like has a word in edgewise, or at least did before I saw a Sombra, was probably Shy. But
yeah, I mean, I think there is the case for Shy, honestly, because I mean he's been doing pretty well, but again, like because he's someone who's limited more towards like the hard hit scans, whereas Pelican has just shown this like unreal flexibility. I feel like Pelican should be winning it out, but obviously I'm hysterically biased towards Pelican. Like sitting in a room with him every day.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, I had this guy, you know, pegged as a potential right at the top of the season before we'd seen any game, before we'd even seen, you know, a single match yet. We just only looked at the rosters, just looking at the rosters on paper. I'm like, dude, I know this Pelican guy fucks. I've seen him play. I've casted him plenty of times. You've got a history with him. You played against him. You guys were in Pacific Showdown. I'm gonna do a little bit of fan service here. I want you to tell the audience your cheeseburger story with Pelican.
Oh Christ, that's an old one, man.
It's a
I
classic,
remember
though.
telling him this at the start of the year, and he giggled like an idiot. But yeah, so we're in Shanghai for the Pacific Showdown because I was a player at the time in 2019, and we'd made it through the Australian contenders bracket to the Pacific Showdown. And O2 Blast were there, Pelicans team, and they came knocking on our cubicle one day because we were in these office cubicle things. They came knocking on our cubicle one day, like offering us food. They had all this like leftover Burger King, so they gave us all these burgers, and they were all wrapped up and everything. It was real nice, and everyone's opening them up, and they look great, and everyone's eating, and they're still warm too. Like it's lovely. And I open up my little wrapped up burger, and it's half eaten. Like someone has taken bites out of their goddamn cheeseburger and then wrapped it back up like they haven't eaten it and given it to us. But I was the only one that had a partially eaten cheeseburger. And then I went back and the others just hadn't eaten their food, right? And then I go onto Twitter and I see they've just tweeted like this team photo of everyone eating their food, and Pelican sitting there taking a bite out of his burger. And having actually gotten here now, I'm even more certain that it was him that ate that burger and wrapped it up, because that kid does not eat a whole lot. He's a skinny boy. So I truly believe that he was the one who gave me that half eaten burger.
Oh, he had a bit of a giggle
That's
when you
funny.
recounted that this year when you met him.
Tragic.
I know
Yeah.
what clip I'm putting at the start of the show. All right, Pelican and cheeseburgers.
Yeah.
I'll try and find the tweet for you.
Is that one? Is that was the one as well? Is like was it you playing in the booth? Like he was playing in the booth on stage, and you just pulling faces at him, just like just fucking with him from the audience.
That was
like-
me and Smash from Kaiser. But yeah, that was Kaiser. I mean, Pelican was on the stage too, of course, but it was Kaiser that was copying the faces, the
Oh
shouting.
yeah, he was. All right.
Bennett found himself, like $1 thing of alcohol at the local H-Mart, not H-Mart, but at the local shop or whatever, and we'd already been knocked out, so he was just drunkenly yelling at Kaiser.
Oh, dude,
Yeah.
fun land stories.
I'd be at a
It
land.
was a fun time. No,
So just going through your roster a little bit more here as well. I think a lot of people, when they looked at the Reign roster, especially early on, it was just like, oh, it's going to be a DPS dominated team. This is a team that's going to need to be carried by their DPSs. A lot of people didn't have faith in your back line or your tank line, but everyone was like, oh yeah, Edison, Kai plus Pelican here looks like a pretty good shout. And I think most people, especially the people that didn't really keep up with contenders, which is a lot of people, just kind of took everyone's word. Like everyone's saying like Pelican's good, so we'll just believe it. So everyone kind of had this thing about it being a DPS dominated team. And then especially when they looked at, I think a lot of people hard underrated Gator and Hawk. And I remember talking to Dogman, Dustin Bowerman, who played on the team last year, and he's obviously got a lot of insight on how the team worked last year, and he always said that Gator and Hawk were really hard-working players, super competitive, really passionate players, and he had a lot of faith in that tank line, and kind of, talking through him, that kind of led me to believe, like, yeah, I think Gator and Hawk probably were underrated. But, if you had to defend and talk about your plays a little bit here, I mean, people shout on Hawk and Gator pretty hard at the start of the year, but I think now maybe people are starting to come around to the fact that they are pretty decent.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that it's actually like, maybe when you look at it from the outside, because it has these like superstar DPS players, people naturally want to say like, oh, it's a DPS carried team. But I mean, I think it's just completely untrue. Like I think Hawk has already won like a few player of the matches. Gator's already won a few player of the matches for like having really, really strong performances in games. And like the same can be said for like everyone on the team. Like just because there are big names on DPS, we have like, even within the DPS line, like at the start of the year, people were saying shit like no Kai, no win. And then we went to Hawaii with Kai on the bench, right? Like we're not relying on any one player to drag us over the finish line by any means, because everyone is actually really, really strong at what they do. And maybe from the outside, sometimes it's a little bit harder to see like what people bring to the table in terms of why the team is winning. But I think that it's actually like a very well-balanced team in terms of the reason that we're winning is because everyone's good at what they're doing.
And I think there's been some misconception as well in terms of looking at specific hero pools, because a lot of people be like, oh, well, Gator, he's like maybe an Orisa Ryan 2 trick, and people look at maybe Iris being like, oh yeah, this guy is just only BAP player kind of thing, and I think a lot of people just didn't even really bring up Master's name, which is a bit of a shame, because when I've looked, I put out a tweet publicly when I looked at your games and reviewed them, I thought Master was like honestly really fucking good, and I think there was some maybe in terms of what builds people's narratives as well, like the previous Reign, I think last year's Reign made people's impression of the team maybe a little bit sour, because there was the whole gatekeeping thing. You're just a gatekeeper team. You're like a midway team that can always beat bad teams, but you'll never beat the good teams kind of thing. That reputation was there, and I think a lot of people consider that Iris was like, yeah, he's okay, but last year Iris, people thought that Iris wasn't that great. And so then you just have a case where a lot of your team gets hard underrated, or at least the reputation is a bit tainted and sour from last year. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think that this year's roster is just objectively better than last year's roster. Like realistically speaking, you know, like I think that they like significantly upgraded the talent and versatility of the DPS line. And then, I mean, everything else is actually the same, right? Like the tank line is the same and the support line is the same. But I think that, you know, they improved the versatility of the DPS line significantly. And then I think the philosophy of the team changed a little bit. Like last year, they had like this really big roster. So they were trying to like chop and change who plays, like what strengths they're trying to play to. Because like when you have a bigger roster, you can fall into the trap of trying to just like appeal to everyone, right? Like they had Popo in, so sometimes they would try to play dive with Popo, but I remember scrimming them last year, and it's like they weren't a particularly strong dive team either, but you know they would still do it because it's like they've got the Winston player, they want to play the dive. You got some cute pictures in there, I see. Oh my god, I like the hybrid picture. I should make that my header. But yeah, but yeah, so I think that like there were some upgrades to the DPS line for sure, but then there's also just like a shift in philosophy in terms of, because they have like this, we have the smaller roster, and now we know like what we're going to be good at, what we're going to be weak on, what we need to work on in order to win, and what we need to play to in order to win. I think that that just improves the team overall. I think that having the big 12-man roster can be a little bit of a trap if you're trying to like give everyone play time, like figure out who's playing all the time. Like you're gonna waste a week of scrims just figuring out who's starting. Like we don't have that issue now.
When it comes to, you know, narrative and philosophy, looking at the Atlanta reign, I think there is it's not a misconception because obviously we don't know for sure, and hopefully you can shed some light on this, but I think there is an idea that this is a very not a player-led team, but like a very vocal player team when it comes to like how they want to do things, what they want to do. Kind of put this to bed. Is that necessarily founded in truth, or is that completely not the case and you guys kind of reign over them with an iron fist?
It's definitely not a team that's run over with an iron fist. I'm not really an iron fist kind of guy, and then definitely neither is Sethi or whatever. You know, like
Right.
we're all people that like we like to have like strong relationships and like friendships with the players, and then in turn, like I think a part of that, you know, if you're going to be like that, it's difficult to simultaneously be ruling over everyone with a iron fist. You know, like it's good to be like disciplinary when required. You know, like get annoyed at people when required, and you know, like tell things to them straight. But at the same time, you know, this is a team where it's like everyone's opinion is respected and everyone speaks up and says their mind. And then if you speak up and say your mind, it's going to have an impact on the strategy that we're taking. Whereas I know that a lot of other teams, you know, it's sort of like, you know, they'll have a head coach and it's like it's his way or the highway, and there's no wiggle room whatsoever. You know, the team will live and die by the head coach's decision, and there is no room for it to change. And that's definitely not the case here.
So players are like very vocal when it comes to like strategy and what they want to do, what they feel comfortable with, and you guys kind of take that and run with it.
Kind of. I mean, you know, some people are definitely more vocal than others, but it's more like, you know, if you have an opinion, it's absolutely going to be heard, and you're not just going to be forced to do something for weeks and weeks on end that you don't like, because, you know, the players actually have intelligent opinions too, right? Like I think relying on one person to just make all the decisions from the top down is a flawed way to go about things.
I mean, dude, I mean, I've heard about, you know, back to Dustin a little bit, who was on the team last year. Like he has stories of last year where I think the whole players being active in their kind of feedback and adding to the overall team structures as far as coaching goes, that's been there for a little while, where they had that entire, there was that story that he said publicly on his show about the time when it just became a player-led team for a little bit. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before that. It could have been 2019. It might have been 2019 actually, because they had that playoffs run. There was a stage there where I might be getting my timelines mixed up, so forgive me. But there was definitely, we'll heal you in a minute, mate. There's definitely been a timeline there where they kind of just became player-led, and they just kind of did their own thing. They believed, I think, yeah, it was was it during the Hog Meta or something like that? That was last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was last year in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think they discovered last year that there was some sort of maybe they knew the Zarya was going to be good, or they knew the Hog was going to be good, something like that, and they wanted to run that. And then there was this bit of disconnect with the coaching staff, and you know they were running something they felt was good for a while, and they were winning, and then then the coaching staff got reintegrated back. I don't know the full story. I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, and then it's sort of to get back mixed back into how it was meant to be with coaches taking the lead, and then they had mixed results again or something like that. So there was that kind of whole story that came out, which I think swayed the public into the whole like, oh yeah, Atlanta shit coaches kind of narrative. But I think we always knew that Atlanta is a team that was very capable in terms of players taking a lot of charge.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all just about having balance, right? Like, you know, being able to keep people in check and being able to keep people on the right track, but also being able to hear them out. I think that like everyone's coaching philosophy differs in that regard, though. Like there are many teams in the league that are just ruled with an iron fist, and that's fine too. Like that works for some of them. But I think that, you know, personally, I believe that creates like a higher stress environment for a lot of people. You know, like there's more pressure on everyone all the time. Both for the players and the coaches, because you know, like you'll permanently feel like you need to perform to this coach's vision, and then if the players at any point like don't respect you at all, then everything falls apart. Because if you tell them to do something that's wrong, you're just forcing them to do it over and over again, and it's going to lose all respect for you really, really quickly. As you say, hey, do this thing, and it's just making them lose, and they can see that, but you can't. So I think that you need to be able to like see when you're wrong and change things based on that.
It's tricky, man. Like I think coaching in a lot of ways, like there's this whole personal to personality into personal relationship kind of thing that has to be managed, and that's always like the hardest part with gamers and everybody and maybe that's even harder remote, I'm pretty sure. But there's like that whole emotional connection between people in that rapport building that's gets overlooked a lot when, you know, everyone thinks of it as just like everyone's playing video games, but who respects who and where the morale is as a team, and you know how people respond to feedback and everything is pretty crucial. I mean, and you've had a decent amount of time coaching now since you've been a player. You've been through British Hurricane, you've been through LA Valiant, you're here now. I mean, how is your coaching philosophy changed over the years, and especially now the difference between working on LA Valiant compared to this team?
Well, I mean, I think on Valiant, like, I mean, you say in terms of like, how's the philosophy changed? I said the philosophy hasn't actually changed that much, but it's more just like finding a place where like what I'm doing fits culturally, because I think that like I had a really good cultural fit on Hurricane because I got along really well with all the players and they were all really happy to take things on. On Valiant though, like I fit really well with Packington. Like I really like working with Packington. He was a cool guy. Like he was good at yelling at people when it mattered and good at being nice to people when it wasn't. Like he's good at rapport building and just like a good leader overall. But I didn't have like the greatest cultural fit with some of the players in the, you know, like some players, they want to be ruled with an iron fist. Some players just want to be told what to do and how to do it all the time. So because I'm not really that person where I don't want to be super, super prescriptive, that can be a little more challenging. So I don't think that I was a perfect cultural fit for some of the players on Valiant because they, you know, they wanted to just be told exactly what to do. And then, you know, they wanted to be like screamed at all the time if you weren't doing that. And I'm just not really that kind of guy. I'm, you know, more of like the shit post with the players kind of guy. Let's be real here.
Sure.
So yeah, and then I come to Atlanta and it's like a full fit, honestly, where I feel like I just, you know, the way that I want to go about things, the way that I want to deliver feedback to people, communicate with the players overall, like it works really well with everyone's personalities. And I can't think of a better group of players than fitting than, you know, people like Gator and Hawk and stuff like that, where they're just, I mean, you see what the team is like culturally from the outside, at least. You know? Do you think I was against us not capping the point?
Right.
I'm pretty sure you instigated it, and that might have been your idea. Like, who the hell knows? Dude, I think I agree, man. I couldn't think of a better team, honestly, culturally, because I already knew how you were as a person. Atlanta obviously has that bad boy vibe, and they have that kind of that culture about them. I think they're one of the more personable teams. I mean, this is one thing you guys got going for your team, is a really well personable team in terms of strong personality, and Atlanta has had that same vibe throughout its entire history with multiple different players. I don't even know if there's is there a single player in the roster that existed from day one Atlanta from 2018? I'm not too sure, 2019 rather. But I mean, Master's been there. Oh yeah, so Master's been there. Brad's been there the whole time, and you've had this kind of Atlanta persona that's stayed through for a couple of years now, which is really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, what were your impressions of Atlanta when you were on Valiant? Because you scrim against them, maybe you played against them. So before you even joined this team, look from the outside, like what did you think?
Well, I mean, I thought they were a pretty good team, but then, you know, like last year they sort of just had their issues. You know, like they had Dogman, who would just, you know, like occasionally just hard throw stuff like that. And but I mean, like, you know, they were a team that would like always dominate scrims. You know, like a really strong team, and then sometimes they would just fall short. You know, like they kind of last year and even the year before, they kind of earned that gatekeeper narrative, right? Because they just kept not getting into the tournament, stuff like that. Whereas now, you know, that's almost more like Bloods, because like lads have actually been exactly the same as Atlanta in terms of like their placement in every tournament all the time, except for this year, where lads have continued to do it and never win anything and never make it to Hawaii or do anything like that. Whereas Atlanta has actually changed and started to go deep into tournaments and have significantly better results. But yeah, I mean, they're also just assholes, right? Like, so that's just the way
that's part of the charm, though, is it? I'm not too sure.
It is. It is.
Yeah, I think it is.
It's not like I hated them for it. Some people will hate them. I like a bit of shit talking.
Yeah.
So that's good.
I actually want to get into a little bit about, because before we started recording, we kind of had a bit of a chat, and I said, like, would you have opinions on some of the other teams here? Obviously, I don't want to get into any tricky waters where I'm not going to make you say something you don't want to say, or have you shit talk a team that will get you in trouble. But I am curious as to where everything lands across the league right now, because you've also been across a few different teams. And you talked about British Hurricane. I'm pretty sure are there still lots of British Hurricane players on London currently that you work with?
Yeah, the whole team minus Joffy. Everyone except for Joffy, because when I left soon after that, Joffy and got Kellex, but the rest of the roster is the same.
Yeah,
except for Hybrid as well.
So what do you think's up with them then? Because you've worked with that whole roster pretty much. Predominantly, you work with the whole roster. And now they're on a massive loss streak. To be fair, a lot of that loss streak came through from last year's London roster as well, but really they haven't recovered. And London is, what's their current scoreline? Does anyone know off the top of their head? They're 0-14.
0-14, yeah.
So when you look at this team, when you know their players and how they work, and you see that record, what are you thinking?
Well, Blase is also new. Danad was also there, and he's not there anymore. So I think that the thing with London is that like they're in a very difficult spot, right? Like they're permanently playing on high ping, like it's awkward for them. And then they came from a scene where it was like a year long of just domination for them, right? Like they would never lose anything all the time. Like they were super used to winning all the time. All of 2020, all they did was win. Like every scrim, every contenders match, just permanently. They lost like one thing in the whole year, and it was just losing to American Tornado in like the NA versus EU finals, like 4-3. So they came off like a really, really long streak of winning, and then they had like a really harsh awakening with Al, where suddenly all of their scrims are on ping at a disadvantage. All of the teams they're versing are significantly harder all the time. So there's a huge increase in the difficulty of their opponents permanently. And I think that that's really hard. Like that's something where, you need to be mentally prepared to just start getting fucked instead of winning all the time. Like it's a really, really big difference, because they weren't exactly like an Overwatch League winning roster at the beginning of it. But I do think that like, that was probably a really difficult adjustment for them early on in the season. They made a couple of roster changes, minus Joffy, minus Danad, plus Blase, and plus Kellex, which I don't think were like bad changes, but also, maybe that changed a little bit maybe that changed some things for the team. Because I do think that, like sometimes back on Hurricane, like Danad would just drag us across the finish line. Like he would just lock doom and just kill everything. Not to put any shade on Blase or anything like that. That's just, when I was there, Danad was there, now Blase is there. So, there are some differences. But I do think that overall, like it's hard to go from winning all the time to losing all the time. And then maybe strategically, like at the start of the season, I feel like they had the wrong approach. Like they were doing a lot of like mirroring dive teams. Like they were looking at Korean teams, like APAC teams, basically full Korean teams that are playing in NA, and they were playing dive mirrors versus them. And I feel like that's not really the right approach when you're from EU, where people don't play a whole lot of dive. The standard of dive skill is like really low. Like they have so much catch up work to do, and they spent not so much time playing to their strengths. So I think that, maybe there were a few like early season wins that they could have snagged and avoided this massive loss streak if they like early on had a different philosophy in terms of what they were going to play. But I don't think that they played to their strengths enough at all at the start of the season.
Yeah, I see the bigger.
Your thoughts on that, Joe?
So you gotta see.
I definitely respect the idea that like obviously playing your strengths is super important. It's something that I think for a long time has been absent from Overwatch. I guess my question would be, is this something that you expect to move forward with the game, that teams are going to have to learn to do more of, where like you can't just identify one thing as really, really strong, assume that that's what's going to be run ad nauseum, but you have to find exactly what fits this roster, what you guys are actually going to do well, what you can actually practice against, and kind of find your own style of things. Is that kind of the meta around the meta, if that makes sense?
I think it kind of depends on the balance of the game, to be honest. Like the flavor of this year has been that nothing is really, really busted, so nothing is hard meta. Like last year, playoffs, if you weren't playing Hog, you were a fucking idiot, because Hog was just completely broken, right? Like Washington was a shit team, and they made it deep into playoffs just picking Hog. just picking a broken hero when a bunch of other teams just refused to do it. Like Houston, Toronto, like they all nearly got far into playoffs despite being really weak teams,
Yeah.
just because they were picking the right hero. And then like Ash Mercy was really strong for all of last year. Brig was insanely strong for like the majority of last year. Like there were so many things last year and the year before, like in the GOATS year, where things were just meta because they were so much better than the alternatives. Whereas this year, things are not hard meta. I really don't think that this year there's like one hard meta comp in any given place. I think that there's lots of wiggle room everywhere. And I think perceiving like a big trap to fall into is thinking that something is hard meta and then thinking even though we're bad at this on an individual skill level, this is what we need to learn. I think if you fall into that trap, then you're just going to lose to the team that is more individually skilled one-to-one on those heroes.
Would you say that June Joust is hard meta though? Because I would now concede. I look at June Joust and I think that was a hard meta with the Lucio Moira. Because my internal narrative, my canon says that Dallas kind of perpetuated that meta a lot because they were the winning team and they were already playing Lucio Moira in melee because they're a fast team and they lacked some of the more hit scan parts of their team, so they couldn't play certain compositions. And I looked at June Joust and like, okay, well, Fuel are obviously gonna play this very, I don't want to call it basic, but it's a very straightforward comp for them. And then I see everyone playing it, and then eventually I'm like, you have Shanghai going to June Joust. I'm like, okay, well, surely Shanghai don't have to play this. Surely the APACs got their strats lined up, and they're not going to be susceptible to this. But they end up even then going towards Lucio Moira, and they adapt further. They play the ball and they win the June Joust. But I think June Joust would have been the one meta this year where I would have said probably especially by the end, if you're not playing Lucio Moira, it just felt like you were behind.
I think if you weren't playing it on Koth, you were kind of just hard throwing, and then everyone wound up playing it everywhere else as well. But I don't think it was actually hard meta. In terms of like balance and strength of other things, I think that there was definitely room to play other comps. Like in Hawaii, we tried to play another comp, but then we shied away from it in the middle of the match. Like we done a little bit of prep to try and counter out those Lucio Moira comps, but then we wound up just going for the net. In the moment, decided maybe we're more likely to win on this. But I think that, like, given the benefit of hindsight, I don't think that it was hard meta. I think it was very, very beatable. I think that if we'd actually just played our counter comps properly, then we would have had a significantly better chance. So I think that even there, where everyone wound up mirroring, I think that we would have had a better chance just playing a counter because it wasn't actually that hard meta.
What do you think is a counter? Can I ask? What do you think is a counter to that? Because I was trying to figure out the whole time.
I mean, it was when we let it into Nombani where like things went wrong because we decided to like mirror instead of playing the counter. And the counter comps, they involved like Brig, Moira / Bap, Torb. Like Torb was really important.
Okay.
Because there was no pocket for Echo because Brig was banned in that state.
Yeah.
Wait, no, it wasn't. What was banned in that state?
Zen was banned.
Right, but because teams were playing Lucio, Moira, Echo, there was nothing to heal the Echo in the sky. So Torb was really, really, really good into that. Bap was quite good into it because he could shoot him out of the sky. So all you needed to be able to do was to like survive the initial coalescence push because they couldn't push you dry when you had Brig, Bap, Torb. I think it was like Reaper as well. Reaper was like a nice greedy pick you could play into it. So like lots of heroes that on their own they look like shit, but when you were versing that one comp that everyone was playing, it was actually pretty good because you just played a bunch of heroes that could survive the initial dive. Yeah. And all you had to do was build up one support ult. So I think we started playing a Moira and trying to build up a coalescence at the same pace because that was just the easiest thing to do. And then if you could survive the initial coalescence dive, you're in a really, really good spot to just counter out all of their ults for the remainder of the map.
I also think Moira was a bit busted. I mean, they nerfed Moira's coal charge.
Yeah, Moira was fucked. She was building coal too quickly.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. I think that nerf was well deserved. I think Moira definitely getting a bit of a nerf was required, which is probably
we just started picking Moira in the counter comp, and then we could build coal at the same rate. Like that was the solution to the problem in the end. Was just don't have the Brig heal, don't have the Brig steal healing from your Moira, and you will build coal at the same rate, and then it's okay. But we just shied away from it in the match, so we kind of fucked ourselves there, honestly.
When it comes to adapting to those comps or creating counter comps, how much of the not onus, but how much are you limited by the amount of time that you actually have to prep? You obviously
extremely.
It's got to be super tight, right?
Yeah, no, it's really, really, really hard, especially for like the Hawaii games and stuff like that, where like there's another region playing like a whole new set of comps that you've never seen before. Like that just makes it even more difficult. Like you add on bans, balance changes, travel for Hawaii, shit like that. Like it becomes nearly impossible to think up everything to look at everything that the enemy is going to play and then have a solution for all of it. So I think that it's flat out like for the whole duration that you're competing. Like there's a lot of work to be done all the time in terms of figuring out what's good, what's bad, what counters what you should be playing, what swaps you need to be making. And then obviously it's not just about the hero swaps, then you need to actually devise strategy around it, tell people how you want them to play when they change the heroes. So it's like there's a lot to do.
When it obviously hero pools for me was always like a nightmare for when it comes to coaching
It was
like,
much worse last year. It's much worse last year.
Oh,
it's
100%.
way worse. Yeah. Holy shit.
But when it
There was
comes
just
to
no
like
strategy last year. It's just
sure, I mean it's got to be impossible to try to figure out like what's being
Week to
played on the
week.
hero pool, what that even
Literally.
looks like, what
Yeah.
maybe a counter looks like, right? It's I do not envy your guys' job. It's really Saints work. But when it comes to like now that the regions are completely separated, now that there's completely different scrim bubbles, you're starting to see even without hero pools being implemented in some of these months, you know, there are differences of opinions. There are different compositions kind of popping up. Do you feel like this is necessary at this point? That the hero pools themselves to add novelty to the league so that we don't see the same thing? Obviously, that's the kind of the big narrative when it comes to the audience. Like they get, you know, viewer fatigue when they see the same compositions. Do you think it's necessarily, and do you think that it would actually help not the integrity, but the competitive level of both regions as a whole, not having to adapt on the fly to all these different changes?
It would be nice if there were no hero pools, just because this year the game has been so diverse in terms of even without the bans, everyone's
Mhm.
playing different stuff. In fact, it's when bans come around that people will wind up playing the exact same thing
Yeah.
because you have less time to
Because you
think
don't
about
know.
what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's actually when the bans come around that everyone just winds up fucking jerking off in a circle in a mirror. But I think that's more with the benefit of hindsight, right? Like you
Sure.
can't really know that that's going to be the state of balance, and they decided this league format before the year had started. So I see how it happened. But you know, in hindsight, I think it would be nice if there were no hero pools. It'd be a little easier to think about the game strategically, like from a coach's standpoint, a player's standpoint.
There was a discussion. I don't know if this got around to the team. I assume this got around to the teams, but there was an internal discussion in May Melee, I think towards the end of May Melee, where it was like, hey, do we want to keep hero pools or not for this year? Because there was a stat line where no
really?
hero was
That's
picked
funny.
above 50%. I think the highest picked hero was
Yeah.
Tracer, and it was somewhere between 45 and 49. And no heroes picked above 50%, and there was an internal discussion like maybe we could actually not do hero pools. But I think at the same time, there would have been, you'd have to, if you were going to bin hero pools for June Joust, you have to bin it for the whole year. And I think there was some level, I don't know why they still ended up with, I mean, it was a discussion, it was worth talking about, and they obviously went with the decision to keep the hero pools in. And that, it's hard for me to speculate, but a part of it might just be a timing thing where like, well, there's not a lot of time for turnaround here. You have to change a bunch of rules. It might fuck some teams up, and the expectation was that we were going to do hero pools, so keeping to the status quo might just be the easier thing. That's just where, you know, to add some context into the hero pool discussion. There was something really interesting actually, because we were talking about London not that long ago, and there was the whole like EU discussion about where EU was and London, British Hurricane dominating, and then also the ping sort of situation, but then you look at a team like Paris, right? And you have to think, well, they're also on ping. They're also EU players. And if nothing else, these are the EU players that kind of got owned by Hurricane. I jokingly refer to most of the Paris squad as like the cut-off EU players because they felt like the bits and pieces they got left behind. And they ended up building a team, credit to AVRL here, where they're now 7-7 and they've turned their entire season around. They might not win the Overwatch League, but I don't think that's their goal. I think they just want to be a reasonable team, which they are right now. So I don't know how the whole ping discussion works and the whole, you know, the EU discussion works when Paris seem to be getting along and making some decent progress when London is still left behind.
I think it's a fair point. I think one thing to note is that like Ripper from Hurricane, or from London now, he has really really bad ping. Like he's
really bad. Okay.
What's he finish? Like he plays on like a wireless stick or something. He gets like
Jesus
100
Christ.
200 ping. Like he has a really bad connection to NA. Like I'm surprised that he signed up for playing Overwatch League, honestly, because like knowing the conditions that he had for the whole year. So like he specifically has like a really really bad run with the ping compared to everyone else. But I do think you raised like a very valid point about Paris, and that it's like Paris is literally a roster of people that were getting shit on by Hurricane throughout the year, scattered across different rosters, of course, in contenders. But then Paris just built like they built a roster that's actually good at some stuff. Like they built a team where they have people who are actually really, really good at the heroes they play, and they play to that. And then they also got JMac as a coach, and I think that JMac is probably like super. I mean, he should be like really highly publicly rated, I think, because I mean, I think he's done like a really good job with that team. Like strategically, you can see that the way they're approaching their matches, they're playing to their strengths really hard, and they're doing things that nobody else are doing. Like they are trendsetters in terms of what they do in some of these stages. Like they're actually really, really good, and they have a strong understanding of dive. And I feel like if you're going to credit anyone with that, other than the players for being skilled at it, you'd have to credit him because he's, you know, like a former Korean main tank player who probably has a very strong understanding of dive, things like that.
just like, almost kind of like weird because like I think when he played on London last year, he was kind of memed on a little bit. But there's always this thing where like sometimes you might have an average career as a player, but you end up being a really good coach. So it's hard to say. But yeah, like J-Mac transitioned really well because he had a rough time on London last year.
For sure. I mean, there are a lot of people who have they have a really strong understanding of the game on paper, but then you put them in the game, and it's obviously hard to execute that too, right? You need to be able to think really, really quickly. You can't just watch from the top down, sit for a while, mull over it, and present your feedback. You actually have to play the game in real time. So I think that former pro players often make good coaches. Like a lot of like main support players, main tank players, like those roles where you're kind of leading the whole team, and you need to think about the big picture a lot in order to play it. I think those are like often pro player roles, pretty common from that.
So just moving along in terms of some of these other teams as well, just something that gets me really curious is obviously Vancouver won their first game recently, and because they ruined the Bread Bowl. It'd be kind of messed up for us to not go over some of the important matches that our regular viewers probably expect us to talk about a little bit here. But Vancouver got an upset win over Boston. And I was, if anyone, I don't know if we would all agree here, but London versus Toronto, to me, probably would have been on paper the match that was going to be the upset win, if anything. But it ends up being Vancouver versus Boston. Obviously, there's, I don't know if you have much of a relationship with Punk or Chex or anyone else on that team, but obviously you've had some experience with Punk in the past, so you probably know him reasonably well.
Yeah, we're mates.
Yeah, but so like, I mean, did you see this coming? I don't think anyone saw this coming. Surely...
No one saw this coming. No, nobody saw this coming at all. That was just out of the blue. I don't know how the fuck they lost that game. How the fuck they lost that game 3-0. Even worse. It's just weird. It's not like Boston are the best team in the world by any means, but again, like no one would have seen that loss coming. No way.
Nope. And they got breadsticks too.
It's just
I think I was looking over that as well. There was that one Mecha Base map where apparently Punky lagged out, because I remember
I heard
talking to him a little bit. He lagged out and he got sent back to lobby. Something happened, and if you look at his POV, the replay viewer, just before the OT happens and they see nine, he's in his POV, he's literally just still frozen for about a second and a half or maybe 2 seconds, and then he suddenly flies to the point and just misses a touch by like 0.05 seconds or something. And if they touch that, they might be able to turn that map around and maybe get the win. So
yeah,
I don't know.
No, it's funny you mentioned that actually. Something about Diva players, because in our match versus Washington, in our match versus Florida as well in Havana, like we had a first point retake fight. It was really, really close, and Hawk got tabbed out of the game. And his game crashed at a later moment in the series. But yeah, Hawk got tabbed out. Like if you go to Hawk's point of view on first point defense Havana from our match versus Florida, you'll just see him start shooting at a wall and walking off into the distance for like 5 seconds straight in the middle of a fight. So it's like
Did he ult tab?
It's really unfortunate when you're like blocked from ult tabbing in the tournament.
So the game bugged out then?
Yeah, it's some weird thing. It must be like an update notification coming up on your computer or something like that. But yeah, I mean that was like the most unfortunate thing ever for Boston. They literally like lose a map to Punky getting tabbed out, and then they lose the next 2 maps, probably because they're like mental boomed over losing a map to Vancouver. But yeah,
people said they weren't flexible, but they were running the risk of the whole time. But as we've kind of talked over here, so first of all, point one is that I think we can all agree there's no like one set meta you must run this comp every single time. But also, I don't think Orisa's that's not a bad choice either. Like that's a fairly good shot to run in this current meta. Boston did run that the entire time. Some people said I'm 37 looked a bit maybe potentially uncomfortable on the Sombra, and there's a bunch of other things in there as well. And then Vancouver obviously got a bit of fire underneath them, and I think once you're Vancouver, you want a map, you start smelling the blood, you're like, holy shit, we can win this. And when you're 2-0 up and you realize, hang on a second, as long as we don't get reverse swept, we can actually win this. At that stage, I think Boston are booming to Vancouver are almost like, mentally they've won the mental battle they've won at that stage.
Yeah, if you're staring down the barrel of a 0-2 Vancouver, you've already lost the game, I think. Because they're the team that it's like you're just not allowed to lose to them. You're genuinely not allowed to lose to Vancouver. Nobody is. Same goes with London. So as soon as those guys start beating you, like your mentors will shatter. Like it is harder to look at a 0-2. I'd imagine, at least. I haven't been there, but it would be harder to look at a 0-2 scoreline versus Vancouver than it would be to look at a 0-2 scoreline versus Fuel, Shock, Glads, Houston, any of those teams, because you just know. You know in your heart that you shouldn't be losing to Vancouver. You just know it. So it's like, what is going wrong? It's over.
Do you have
already fried.
Do you have any thoughts on, because like I said, I kind of teed up this as the other match, but London, Toronto, right? And London are just still aren't able to get away. I think Toronto's a weird team in a way because they're the team that people forget about.
Is that happening next week?
No, they've already played. London and Toronto already played each other, and Toronto won that 3-1. And Toronto seems to be this kind of forgotten team in a lot of people's eyes because no one really talks about Toronto. They exist. No one really says like, oh, this is a kind of bad team. Although I think secretly when you look at some of the games that they played, it doesn't feel great because they're where they are on the standings again. They are, I believe they should be bottom 10 surely. Let me just take a look real quick. They're actually number 7. They're 8-6 on 8 points. So this is like a weird team because they're technically above Paris. But if you were to like kind of ask around, I would say that in my mind, Paris sounds like a strong team, feels like a stronger team, but Toronto's kind of in the middle there. I don't know if you guys have much experience versus Toronto, what you guys think about them as a team, but and this the other thing here is that Toronto plays San Francisco, and you would love it if Toronto beat San Francisco, I'm sure. But
yeah, I don't know how likely it is, but I mean, I'm sure we'd love it because anything that puts the 2, 4, and 5 seeds down right now is a nice thing for us. I do think that like Defiant, like they're kind of slept on in the sense that like they have some like real talent on their roster. Like they have people that are actually like really, really, really good at what they do, but then they also just have people who are not very, very good at what they do. It's kind of the same thing with Washington, honestly. I feel like Toronto and Washington have very much the same issue where it's like they have multiple players who are like insanely good, and then they have other people who are just shit, really, just like not good enough. And all it really takes is like 1 or 2 people being not good enough at this level for your team to just suffer inexcusably. Like if you've got 2 people that suck, you're going to lose a lot of matches to those 2 people throwing your games over and over and over again.
That just sounds like Overwatch at all, at all levels.
But that's what happens to teams like Toronto and to teams like Washington, where it's just like the rosters, like you look at the players on the roster and you're like, wow, this team's going to be so good. Like, look at all these awesome, genuinely good players. But then your eyes just kind of like skim over the people that are going to throw the series, like because they will.
Well, I'll save you the defamation of naming anybody, so we won't go that far. I don't want to get you into hot water there, but I appreciate the honesty anyway.
We lost to Toronto at the start of the season. Remember, we got rid of the swept by them.
Yeah.
So.
Reverse sweeping. Speaking of which, I mean, there's Sol that actually got another reverse sweeping. So you were saying before, I don't know if I think you said this before we started recording, but you probably haven't seen a lot of the APAC games. But I wanted to dive into a little bit anyway. Maybe this will just end up being me and Joe talking a little bit more. But just to go over what's been happening on that side of the world. But Shanghai, okay, let's be real. They're obviously taking it a little bit easier. But that being said, they actually came through with a really big win over Seoul. And I think I said this in the last episode, Joe, but I was like, okay, even if Shanghai don't give a shit and they don't plan to go to Hawaii and they don't really care about winning, they will come in and they will try their absolute hardest against Seoul because there's just that rivalry that's always been brewing from day one, and they do not want to lose to Seoul no matter what. That was still a pretty close game. And I think this is kind of like almost the peak of Shanghai for Countdown Cup, which is kind of a shame because the peak of Shanghai for Countdown Cup is a narrow 3-2 victory versus Seoul, which really goes to show that their kind of lax schedule and them taking a bit of a break and playing their bench a little bit, it's kind of hurt them a little bit here, and it's really no surprise that Shanghai are not going to be going to Countdown Cup. And if for whatever reason they squeeze in as like the 4th seed, I don't even know that they win their knockout match. And if they win their knockout match, I don't know that they'll be particularly good. So as much as Unter you're saying like it's great that Shanghai are there, I don't know that Shanghai would be great even if they were in the tournament. Just from what I'm saying.
Probably not, right? Like they started late. It sounds like it felt like they started late. It's probably best in the long run. Like they have the cushion to be able to go into playoffs, say, look, we probably need a break. We want to give, the players a kind of a mental reset coming into such a big, important match. One that seems to be like very winnable for them, right? Like we've seen this roster reach such heights and be so, competent on so many different things that, I feel like it would be a disservice to the league if they weren't coming in with as much resources as possible, coming in as fresh as they can. Obviously, things are probably going to change with the patch. What that looks like, it's difficult to say. But yeah, it's probably for the best that Shanghai doesn't go. Much in the same way that Dallas kind of is maybe not going.
Pretty sure Shanghai's booking their tickets to Texas now. I'm pretty sure they'll be on their way over to you, Unter.
Genuinely, I feel like they might want to just leave earlier, get used to being there sooner, rather than go close to the tournament and then get fucked on sleep and adaptation of the schedule, all that sort of thing. I genuinely believe.
Just move next door to Dallas. Start hanging out.
If they're not going, it's because they want to go earlier to Dallas. I believe that. They probably
I mean, it
wanna
makes sense.
and go to
Why
Dallas
not?
early. Exactly.
It's something that the league might not be super happy with, but your job's to win a championship. Your job's to bring home the trophy. Why wouldn't you? You have that kind of cushion. You were good enough all
Fuck,
season to be
other
able to
teams will
build
be
up that
happy.
gap.
Who cares about that? I mean, the teams go to Hawaii be happy. They don't give a shit. Like, it's like, Shanghai don't want to play. Cool, I'll play. That'll be my dub. I'll take that free dub. Like, Jesus Christ. If they don't want to sit at the table and eat, man, I'm having double servings. So
Yeah, why not? The one thing I'll say with Seoul is that there has been this big narrative that they are kind of they seem very focused in one direction coming into a tournament. So they come out really, really strong. They have a good idea of what they want to do, but they fail to adapt in some situations. I feel like this is a good Seoul example of them actually being super flexible. They're throwing out dive looks. They're throwing out Orisa looks. I think they started on Orisa and they're trying to pepper in more dive. And it looks solid overall. Like I genuinely believe this is probably their best chance to have a good tournament. Obviously there's still some steep competition with Chengdu and whatnot, but they look good.
Because they also reverse sweep Philly. And that's the thing. It's like Philly fans, once again, heartbroken. They're just phenomenally, inevitably, and forever heartbroken because they're 2-0 up and they get reverse sweep. Bro, I don't think... you mentioned you got reverse sweep by Toronto, and that's probably... Getting reverse swept by anybody feels like probably utter shit, right? I mean, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, not a good feeling.
But,
That's
dude,
all.
Philly looked like they had a good plan. Philly looked like they are onto a decent amount of progression this particular tournament. They dropped to Seoul. Philly have been reverse swept. Here's a fun fact. I've tweeted this out as well. Philly have been reverse swept twice this entire year, and Seoul has completed a reverse sweep against another team 3 times this year. So the team that is like the best at reverse sweeping is Seoul. Their mentals must be fucking ironclad. And Philadelphia is, I don't know, they've gotten reverse swept by Chengdu, and now they've gotten reverse swept by Seoul, and it just feels like they can't catch a break. Both teams, for what it's worth, we're playing a lot of Orisa stuff. So there's a bit of Winston. I'm actually seeing a lot of Winston coming back. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Unter, but a lot of teams are kind of going towards some more Winston Zarya double bubble again. I think Hotbar in particular is forcing a shitload of Zarya, and in my opinion,
they
starts
love
to cost them a little bit.
Hopper on Zarya. Yeah. I think that like because Hopper's like hero pool might be a little bit limited. Like I think he's just not very good at Diva, so that's probably why they're putting him on Zarya over and over and over again.
If you're a flex tank, I feel like if you're a flex tank, you play 3 heroes. Your hero pool really shouldn't be limited, right? It seems like a weird thing. It's
shouldn't be limited,
like
but
Diva and Zarya. It's like, come on.
It's quite common though.
When DPS players are expected to play like 7 heroes or something, and a flex tank's like, here you go, you get 3. It's like half the hero pool for DPS, really. Maybe I'm generalizing and simplifying, and that's not fair, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a little unfair just because like sometimes these heroes are so like stylistically balanced with each other. You know, it's like asking the question like why are the best Winston players probably not the best Ryan players? Why are Winston players not? Why are the best Winston players probably not the best Orisa players? That sort of thing. Maybe
very
Winston
different,
is the best Orisa player in comparison. It's because like the heroes are just stylistically completely at odds with each other. You know.
Yeah.
Just complete opposites. So it's like they're in the same role under the same umbrella. Like you need to have a different mindset to play the 2 different heroes to the top level.
So another team that's forcing a lot of Zarya is Kalios on NYXL. I don't know if you have any thoughts on Zarya as a hero here, or like the Winston Zarya double bubble, because that seems to be teams are defaulting, and I'm doing a bit. I'm obviously back in Contenders Career as well, and I'm seeing a lot of the Contenders Career teams, including the top ones like O2. There's a lot of teams going back to Winston, return to Monkey, except literally right now they're literally returning to Monkey as a strategy, and it's just like, I don't know where this is coming from, that like teams are even starting to move away from ball back to Winston, and there's fair few teams in YXL Fusion in particular that are hard forcing Zarya, and I don't know if Zarya is good. In my mind, I don't think Zarya is particularly good right now, but these guys just want to go to it.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that like for the APAC region, like Korean Contenders and APAC Al both, like you're talking about like return to Monkey or whatever, but I mean like that's just like the bread and butter dive that they all want to play. Like it's the ultimate comfort pick. So I think like when in doubt, when you're struggling with something, like that's the first thing that they're going to turn to try and play. It's like if we're talking about play to strengths, like that's going to be the strength of a lot of these teams. And then the teams that you mentioned, like Mixel and Young Hopper, like that's the like Kalios and Hopper. Zarya is their strength. Like it's their strongest hero. So I see why they want to play. Even though it's not like maybe better defining, it's just what they're best at. So I think that's why they run with it.
And Joe, I don't know if you caught this game. There was it's the one that I cast. What was it again? It was the NYXL versus Chengdu game, And that was a really revealing game to me from both sides of the fence. And a little bit of disappointment from NYXL because their season is in jeopardy now because they go 2-2 this stage. They're not guaranteed to go to the Countdown Cup. They've actually, by the way, finished the entire, as you guys have, finished the entire regular season. All 16 matches, done and dusted. You're in a much better place because you're guaranteed to knockouts. NYXL are not. There's a real shot that we may have just seen the very last NYXL game of the year. It's done. It's over. Because they're also bottom 3. They could be bottom 3 in APAC, which doesn't get them into play-ins. Play-ins for APAC is brutal in terms of the cutoff. You have to be top 5. Top 2 go to Texas. 3, 4, and 5 go to play-ins, and then 6, 7, 8, they're gone. They're done. They're finished for the entire year. Valiant are dead. We all expected that. Charge are most likely gone, and then it's between NYXL and Hangzhou. One of those two teams will not make it, and that comes down to Hangzhou's results. If Hangzhou play well, if they do anywhere well versus Chengdu, NYXL are done for the year. Because we expect that Hangzhou, I don't know if they'll beat Charge. I feel like they would. But NYXL versus Chengdu is a matchup where I was trying to get towards is... Like, obviously, Chengdu are the Pharah team, and NYXL looked like they had a good game plan versus Jinmu on the Pharah, and they ran a lot of Guangbong. He came out on the McCree. Flora's in there as well. They were running some double hit scam. Flora's obviously playing a bit of Tracer. They were putting Nano specifically onto the McCree, so it was Jonak on Ana, putting almost 100% of Nanos onto Guangbong's McCree to try and deal with Jinmu. It worked for one map on the Nepal, and then it just started failing, and these Nano McCrees just started looking like... Please nano anybody else because you're just not hitting the shots anymore. And Jinmu's abusing all the terrain. They got Rialto that you said Rialto's a really good Pharah map. Jinmu fucking pounded on Rialto, and this guy's Pharah was just unstoppable. And this is versus a team that specifically tried to build the composition to hard counter Pharah, and they majestically failed to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes that's the thing where it's like you can try to countercomp someone. You can try to find a solution to what people are doing. But if they're really good at what they're doing, like sometimes they just make it work. And I mean that works in both directions. In the sense that it's like, you know, sometimes you're really good at playing like a counter, and sometimes you're really good at just like playing your stuff. Like sometimes you can genuinely play your stuff into everything. Because Chengdu, like they love to play the Pharah so much. Like Jinmu is just that good at it, and they do it so often. Like no matter how hard someone tries to pick like a long to beat them, like a lot of teams are just not going to be able to pull it off because you're not losing off comp, you're losing off skill.
Yeah, I tend to agree that like when you're good at, like you said, if you're so good at something that you can kind of force and really make it work, it does feel really, really difficult. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on this kind of age-old, you know, it feels like since the start of Overwatch, there has been this idea around trying to ignore Pharahs that are a little oppressive. Is there some weird kind of strategy that you could run to, you know, if you can't necessarily answer it or mark it with a hit scan, or even investing the D.Va might be a little bit too much, but is there something that you can kind of just bust the tanks and maybe just overrun the backline to try and
run it?
Obviously you can't now, but something.
Yeah, I think either you match it with like a Pharah or something like oppressive hit scan pick, depending on the map. Like some maps it's really good for Pharah, so hit scan isn't as good into it. But either you match it with like a hit scan or a Pharah, or you out tempo it by just going really fast. So it's not really so much about busting the tanks. I'd say it's more about like getting on the back line, getting on like any vulnerable heroes. Like tanks aren't vulnerable heroes majority of the time, unless people are playing Zarya everywhere. But yeah, like for the majority of it, like you try to out tempo it if you're not going to match it, and that's Lucio, and that's go fast. But that's just not existing at this stage because Ben's.
Yeah.
You'll actually notice something here as well. Is like one thing that was quite interesting about this matchup in the NYXL Chengdu game is they pulled Kalios off of Zarya, which has been his comfort pick, much like Hotbar and the Zarya as well. And they pulled it away because Kalios has to go D.Va versus Jinmu, otherwise it's a hard throw. You're playing against either the Sombra or most importantly the Pharah here, and Kalios needs to match that. And another part of that matchup to me was coming down to that fact that I don't know. I feel like Kalios just didn't really pressure Jinmu. Like, you didn't see him flying in his face. You didn't see him DMing the matrices. You didn't even see him, DMing the barrage. You didn't see him flying into the barrages, doing any of the typical stuff. Whereas I noticed, you look at a team like yours, where Hawk has been really on point with, pressuring fires out and just applying pressure and putting time into dealing with fires. I mean,
yeah,
you guys are a team that maybe are pretty more well prepped to dealing with fire. Maybe I'm not too sure.
Yeah, well, it could just be a skill thing, right? Where it's like, maybe Nixel are playing Kalios on Zarya because they think that he's not very good at D.Va. So then, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Either you're playing Zarya into Pharah and you have nothing to deal with the rockets, or you have Kalios on Zarya on D.Va to deal with the rockets, and he's not good at either, right? Like, neither is a good answer. So, maybe that's the situation that they're in. not trying to like aggressively shit on Kali
Yeah,
or anything
yeah.
like that. But, you know, like if they're not playing him on Diva because he's weak on it, then they either have to play something that sucks into Pharah, or they have to play him on a hero that he's weak on. So damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a comfort pick thing as well. I don't know, it just looked like a weird game.
It's got to be stylistically weird, like you said. It's really really bad into Pharah. I think I think I mentioned this last show. I felt like the double bubble and the Zarya wrecking ball stuff. It seems to be pretty strong. It feels like into maybe Arista based compositions, and obviously Chengdu not going to be breaking that out a whole lot. They're predominantly a dive team, like we've mentioned. Any thoughts when it comes to Zarya into something a little bit more bunkery? Is that something that maybe the main tank can exist in the brawl a little bit longer, maybe get a little bit more value?
Yeah, I mean, I think people pick the Zarya in an attempt to like enable their main tank harder. You know, like they want their Winston can actually use his shift ability once if you have a Zarya to enable him and stuff like that. But overall, I just think that it's not like the strongest concept into bunker the majority of the time. It's like because you're banking so much on the main tank, like you're putting more eggs in that basket. It's kind of like the thing that Washington did sometimes, where it's like they're often playing constant, like really heavily rely on like pocketing Mag. You know, they're putting Mag on Winston and they're putting heaps of resources into him. So it's like if Mag isn't carrying on Winston, then like nobody else has any trade potential because they're playing a comp that is all built around pocketing him. So I think that like the upside of playing things like Zarya is that you can enable your main tank more, but then your main tank needs to deliver at the same time, and sometimes it's just unrealistic to expect them to do it all.
Totally.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
I think as we move forward as well, the only other team that had a bit of a showing this past weekend was Guangzhou Charge, which, you know, they've made some... I think they got better as a team, but unfortunately their two matches were against the quote-unquote best teams. I only put that in quotations because Shanghai has kind of taken it easy, but they still want to. Shanghai, they dropped in Molly for 2 maps, and I think actually Molly played reasonably well, but you know Shanghai are taking it easy when they're just hard flexing their bench when they want to. And Easyaki is a player that's been really popping off this year, so it's no slight against Molly. It's just that Easyaki is like god tier in comparison. But Molly came in, won a map, lost a map also. In Guangzhou, they kind of got, in my opinion, hard carried by Eileen on the Hanzo, and like as we said earlier in the show, I think Hanzo's been a bit of a sleeper pick, at least in my eyes. Maybe I'm the stupid person that didn't see Hanzo as a pick, but Hanzo came in as a bit of a surprise, and Eileen really popped off. And in fact, if there was one thing that really shut down Jinmu, surprisingly, it was Kareev putting a Discord on Jinmu's Pharah, and then just Eileen shooting that dude out of the sky with the Hanzo somehow, and that ended up working. Kind of
wild. I mean, it's a creative strategy, but you know, I do think the thing with Shanghai is that like if you see who are you develop Molly in the starting lineup, like they're taking the piss. Like taking the piss. Yeah, it's like especially, I don't want to shit on develop specifically because I think develop's actually like a really really good player. It's just like, you know, with all the metas that have been played so far this year, like it's never a double hit scan meta. Flutter's fucking insane at Tracer too. So it's like they have a starting 6 that is permanently starting 6. Those other 3 players are just there for
So there's like a couple things. We're about to reach about 2 hour ish. We're probably heading towards the end of the show now. But a couple of things I still want to touch up on really quickly is, and this is going to be an interesting one for you, Unter. So feel free to say as much as you want, as you're allowed to say, or just fucking tell me to shut up if this is not something you want to get into at all. But I think one of your main opponents is going to be Chengdu, and they are pretty much guaranteed in. We already teed that up. Beyond that as well, they've really shown their hand, I think, over the past weekend. They will continue doing that over the next weekend as well. I don't think they have much of a hand to show. Their hand is like 3 cards, and you've seen them all by now. You are almost guaranteed to be going up against a team that is going to be hard forcing a Pharah that is a Pharah-based team that's going to dive you with a ball. This is what they play. This is all they can do. You may or may not have seen a team like NYXL try to hard counter with McCree. Nano and the McCree doesn't quite work in there. You may or may not have seen Guangzhou do something with Eileen on the Hanzo. You've seen different teams try different options versus the Pharah, and everyone, for whatever reason, seems to fail against the Jinmu Pharah. What do you think is the answer? And again, this might be tricky because I don't want you to show your hand in terms of like, oh, this is what we're going to do against Chengdu in the tournament. Don't do that. But like, I don't know if you have any general thoughts on how do you beat this Chengdu team if you're going up against them.
I mean, I think it is super map specific, and then like also for this band set because there's no Lucio, it's like impossible to out tempo the Pharah. So I think on maps where Pharah isn't good, you're just not going to match it. You're just going to play like the strong hit game counters and trust in your hit scan player to get it done, depending on the map. But then for the Pharah maps, I think genuinely probably your only option to really make it work is to match it, because if it's a good Pharah map and you can't out tempo it, you have to launch it. That's my philosophy at least. So yeah, I think for Chengdu, it's like, is it a good Pharah map? If so, we're probably playing Pharah. Is it not? Maybe not. But
Okay.
you know,
It's not like you can't
Chengdu-
pilot Pharah.
Yeah, Pelican's got to be in some
Pelicans-
2v2 training
Oh,
between now and then, I'm sure. It's so
I
far.
mean, I'm sure Pelican will catch up on his MIDI practice. But at the end of the day, like we'll have to wait and see with Chengdu. Like it's not like I've been sitting down studying Chengdu's VODs, preparing for Hawaii. I've been sitting down watching the VODs of our opponents.
Exactly,
like,
yeah.
know,
You got to
we're
get to
getting ready
Hawaii
play.
first, right?
Yeah. So it's definitely about you plan for those opponents once you get there, just because you don't have time. You just don't have time. Now we have our week off, but again, like we're not going to be watching the APAC VODs. We're going to be watching all the teams that are playing this
Gotta
week,
get
so
there.
we can actually get there.
Yeah.
So
makes
we'll
sense.
figure it out when we get there.
Anything to add on that, Joe?
Yeah, it is a conundrum. It's difficult. I think the surface area of what you can kind of rush onto, maybe even with like a Symmetra is tough. There's not a ton of like targets to pick. Obviously, with the support line, On is the only target that you can kind of really jump on, but then there's a lot of stuff to get in the way of that. It is bizarre. It is bizarre. I do like the idea that you can kind of mirror it. If you can pilot that, then that's definitely a tool that you can kind of call upon. But yeah, it's just like the hit scan maps where they're going to force it. They're going to kind of just run it into you. And if you can get them off of it, Chengdu that is, Jinmu's Sombra has improved, but it's not his best hero. Obviously.
It's not lip on all.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I think there is ways of trying to mitigate it as best you can. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough especially if you can't run it, or at least well.
Yeah.
But I don't think Atlanta will have an issue.
We have a Pharah player, so
Exactly.
not completely terrified of it. But
No.
yeah. It's definitely like a unique problem because like he's
What is this?
one of the best. Oh, that's the
Yaxter.
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, Dongmin. That's the translator for your team. I don't know if he might be a player manager as well.
Just trying to follow this year.
Good night.
No.
Yeah, it's probably getting a bit late for you guys, so we're going to end with something fun here, which is, and this is a rare thing that I think a lot of people never get to really get into the minds of or think about, and this is not like a hyper competitive question that reveals anything, but it's just kind of for fun, is that, when Overwatch 2 eventually releases in 5 to 10 years, like from your POV as like someone in the Overwatch League, a coach, or even from a player POV, like maybe even for competitive purposes, like what do you want to see? Like what do you need here? Like what are things that need to happen to move the game forward? It's just like a fun, interesting thing.
But I don't know, honestly. Like I like the state of Overwatch. Not really. I like the state of Overwatch 1. I think that it's a good game, balance-wise. I think that like if they kept adding stuff to Overwatch 1 instead of having like a near 2-year lull in all forms of development. True, but at the same time, like even when it was unbalanced, I mean, I like the game. Like I like that the game changes. I think that Overwatch 2, it's not like I have this big wish list because I don't even know what Overwatch 2 looks like anymore. Now it's a 5v5 game with one tank and stuff like that. So like, I don't even know what the game plays like anymore. I don't even know if I'll like it anymore when it comes around to Overwatch 2 because they're going to have to so significantly change the core gameplay to balance it around 5v5. But I mean, all I want to see is just what I want to see with Overwatch 1, which is like more regular balance changes.
Okay.
And like just, like add more maps, add more heroes, shit like that. Keep the game fresh because the game is no longer fresh. They took Horizon Lunar Colony out of the pool like 2 years ago to change it, and they just forgot about it. Same with Paris. People are happy to see 2CP gone, but we still have to play 2CP every fucking week. Like it's just there's no variety in the game anymore because they don't change anything because they don't even develop it anymore. So it's like now it feels like once every month or once every 2 months they'll go into the patch notes and they'll like move a percentage up on a slider for one hero and move another one down, and that's the core gameplay change. Like there's nothing happening anymore. So Overwatch 2, I just want to see more change.
Okay.
I want the game to be fresh.
That being said, we're going to go back to one thing you said. The game is balanced because there has been no new heroes and no additional changes. The one thing that always causes the game to get thrown up in the air in terms of balance, I believe, is like new heroes being added kind of throws things against the wall. Shit hits the fan pretty often when new heroes come in.
I don't mind that.
Yeah.
But they need to be willing to change it quickly.
Yeah,
Genji shouldn't be busted for like 2 months straight. Like last year, they made Genji really OP and it stayed for like a really long time. It should just be faster that they make the changes. If something appears broken, then change it, and then it shouldn't take like a a month and a half long development cycle to change the like damage number on his shuriken from 30 to 28 or whatever they did. You know, like they're just so slow to do all this stuff. They're so slow to take on all of the pro feedback. They rely way too much on like literal plats who have no idea about the balance of the game. Like you watch the people playing Overwatch 2 at BlizzCon, and they just look like.
Not great.
Yeah, we'll get some. Hopefully, one day the beta codes will get given out to some pros, and you can have some real fun with that.
For the Overwatch League in particular, with regarding like more frequent balance changes, obviously totally agree with that. But as it's implemented, is there a worry when it comes to specifically coaching and kind of figuring out the state of the game? Is there a worry that they could implement it to the league itself on the tournament client a little bit too fast to kind of cause like a lot of just flux, or would you rather that kind of be paced out much like the stage system has been thus far? Like, do you want those changes to happen immediately for the league, or do you want them kind of spaced apart?
I think the cadence has been pretty good this year in terms of like how they implement it on a stage by stage basis. So I think that's good. But I just meant more generally for the game in terms of like the game feeling like healthy and like making the pros enjoy it would be like more regular change, things like that. But yeah, I mean obviously there are like some difficult implications. So, if they're changing the balance every week within the stages, especially like when they have these long tournament cycles, it's not fair to change the balance in the middle of that cycle because it's just completely unbalanced to do that from a competitive standpoint. So yeah, I mean there's a fine line to tread, but I do feel like they always make really small changes, and then they'll just like randomly make one big change that makes something really broken. It'll take forever for them to fix it. So it's odd when they do that. Like they'll push something to the test realm, and people will say that it's broken, and they will just push it to live anyway for no reason. It's like people will see the patch note and instantly say, "This looks fucking unfair," and then it's live. Like they just recently pushed ball changes to live, where people saw them. They saw them in writing and said, "This looks OP," and they just pushed it to live anyway. Like no questions asked, no discussion whatsoever. It's just live.
I just kind of brought up the discussion because I know your team, when the whole 5v5 thing came out, Gator and Hawk were quite outspoken about it. And it just seemed like a
job. So
yeah, that's true. But I think that is true. I mean, the players obviously have a different stake in it. So there's that whole thing as well. But interesting discussion. Thought I'd just get your point on that. And otherwise, man, Joe, unless you got any other closing thoughts.
No, I mean, I could sit here and probably pick his brain for hours, but I know that things are getting late out in Atlanta, so I think it's a good place to stop.
The only thing I'm disappointed in here, Max, is you guys have removed all the cocks off the wall, and don't get your minds out the gutters. I mean, the sponsor COX, so no more cocks on the walls. A bit disappointing. Other than that, though,
I got my nice Overwatch League Coca-Cola tumbler here.
Oh, there you go.
But there is no more Overwatch League next Coca-Cola, so here's to that.
All right, drink up, mate. We'll let you have a great night and look forward to your matches coming up in the knockouts, of which you're one match away from going to Hawaii. You're looking for some really good points and a strong end to the season. And no matter what, you guys will be guaranteed to play in. So you still have plenty of season ahead. And I'm sure everyone will be keeping a keen eye on that. But it's been great to catch up, mate. It's been long overdue. Wish you all the success, and I'm sure we'll talk again in due time. Have a really great night. Thanks for being on the show.
And yeah, we have at a bare minimum a single elimination match to determine whether we get to play in the playoffs. So yeah, great. All right, thanks.
This episode brought to you by Battle Crab, Refined Bean, Bronzebot Buhal, Chare, Chris R34444, Fabled Steven, Hunter Tane, Casher67, Lolshin, Rexane, Sir Girthalot, Wilma D, Yiskas Orpa Shower Gel, and Your Misery.